Two heroes, Eraserhead and All Might. They were standing at the base of the tallest pillar in the room, both with heads craned upward. Midoriya was surprised All Might was here, but then again, wasn't this when 1A's heroism class was supposed to take over? This was ultimate move training, so hypothetically, he guessed the former number 1 hero with 51 ultimate moves should be a big help on the subject. At least Eraserhead was here, one of the heroes who knew that Ronin had died. Midoriya had wanted to talk to him before getting in deep with the class, just to explain himself and what was going on. Nezu had probably filled the tired teacher in already, but it felt right to do it himself. As he slowly walked into the gym, it really hit him how big it was, just seeing some of the pillars easily go 30 to 40 feet in the air. The size of some of the buildings he parkoured on. Maybe it was on one of those higher platforms his favorite student, Kaminari, was training since Midoriya couldn't find him anywhere. While he couldn't catch Kaminari on the platforms he could see, his ears caught wind of Bakugo with a loud bang. Up on the platform Eraserhead and All Might were looking at, Midoriya could see the flash of an explosion and catch its echo as a small bit of rubble tumbled harmlessly in front of the two teachers. It seemed like one of his best students was back at his grind again. And how funny that he considered Bakugo, of all people, one of his best. Crack. Reminiscing was cut short by a crack from on high, immediately throwing Ronin's gaze upward. Something large fell from the top platform, quickly picking up speed and falling towards the two teachers standing so close to the platform. Ronin's bodysuit was left on from the training earlier, letting him spring straight into action. Before someone above could shout out a warning, Ronin was already sprinting, pushing his body and suit hard to make good time. The world seemed in slow motion as All Might's eyes trailed upward, locking onto a massive piece of rubble falling quickly towards him, giving him only time to take a single step back as it hurtled through the air to crush him. Eraserhead moved further back, getting himself to safety while tugging his captor scarf free of his neck to try and pull All Might clear. A voice shouted throughout the gym from on high, giving a warning too late to most of the people below. Ronin, meanwhile, quickly covered the distance between the entrance and All Might, roughly throwing the former hero clear of the initial impact before jumping up to take care of the rest. The rebel was falling a few feet from the pillar, so Ronin used it to ascend. Beowulf activated his Ronin jump, launching him several feet into the air straight at the pillar before switching from push to pull. Claws and boots dug into the stone for just a moment to get his bearings, taking in the massive size of the incoming rock before he launched himself straight towards the descending danger. Ronin's brain rattled in his skull as he leapt up off the pillar, spinning himself midair to hit the pillar legs first. He pulled his entire body in, activating the pull for just a second to anchor in the rock, then pushed as he kicked the rock further back into the stone pillar. With a force as massive as the rock, the two parted ways, one sailing gracefully through the air and the other crashing into the stone pillar it fell off of. In just 3 seconds, Ronin cleared the distance between the entrance to the pillar, and in one he reached the falling rock midair. It was hard to say what happened after he dropkicked the falling stone into the pillar, the two rocks hitting one another and creating a small cloud of dust, but Ronin could still see enough to flip right side up and stick the landing. Of course, sticking the land meant he landed legs first, then dispersed the rest of his momentum by turning it into a slobby roll. At least no one could see him fuck everything up, almost landing on his sword, thanks to the dust. Midoriya quickly hopped to his feet, breathing out to clear the dust from his lungs. Glancing through the mess he'd made, it seemed like he had shunted All Might to safety. In hindsight, he probably could have just pulled All Might out of the way, no need for dramatics. Shit. Acknowledging to himself how stupid he'd been, Midoriya put on his best smile and moved to the retired hero, currently seated on the floor where Ronin had thrown him like a massive dickhead. Really needed to work on his thinking mid-crisis, and no better place to start than now. Moving through the dust and problems he helped create, Midoriya offered All Might a hand up, calling out to help the former hero identify him. Still haven't figured out how to dodge, All Might. All Might just gave a small cough in return, trying to wave away some of the dust. Midoriya grabbed the outstretched arm, putting his other arm under his hero to help lift him up safely and steadying him for a second. Ka. It seemed the dust had gotten almost everywhere, as a quick glance showed even Eraserhead was trying to clear it from the air. He waved some of it away, squinting through the dust to check on All Might, and was surprised to instead see the figure of Ronin standing between them. Why you? Sorry I'm late to training. I'm blaming Nezu, Midoriya led with another lame joke, hoping to defuse the situation a little bit. All Might was on his feet now, but Ronin still kept an eye on him to make sure he stayed on his feet. Still, he redirected most of his focus to Eraserhead and the training he was here to do. But I'll be picking up where I left off, so don't worry, I'll be out of your hair in no time. Midoriya gave Eraserhead a random pat on the shoulder, using the same motion to push past the teacher and out of the dust cloud. With his drastic entrance, he changed plans. He'd just be so confident that Eraserhead had no time to question what was happening. Yeah, that sounded dumb enough to work. So with his legs shaking he walked into UA's training grounds, pretending as hard as he could that everything was going great. A hand on his sword, Muramasa, helped to ease his nerves. He smiled as he stood in front of the training pillars, taking a second to glance around the room. From the pillar in front of him, a small patch of bright blonde stuck over the edge as someone looked down on him. From the sides, he could see the distinctive pink blob of Mina and the swinging shape of Zero. The door into the gym finally swung open, Eraserhead having let Nezu in while Revenant took stock. Somehow, he'd need to get all of 1A's attention. Did they have an intercom system in here, perhaps a loudspeaker he could use to talk to everyone at once like Nezu used to talk to Tubi earlier? Would he just have to shout like Bakugo would have? Midoriya scratched his chin, mumbling quietly to himself until interrupted by the loudspeaker he'd been pondering about. Nezu spoke through it, pulling everyone to the front of the gym for him. If all of Exam F could please stop what they're doing, the next part of your training has arrived. Please move to the front of the gym. The announcement went on, but Midoriya couldn't hear the rest as the sound of explosions scudded off from above. He glanced up, not even bothering to take a step back as Bakugo jumped down from on high. The boy that boomed had great control over himself, easily slowing his descent to land in front of Ronin without either moving. Seeing the fine-tuned control, Midoriya couldn't help but smile to see how far he'd come. The others came too, and they came fast. From one side he could see a flash of pink as Mina took off, sliding down her pillar and out of sight. On the other end of the gym he could see Zero holler, jumping up and down ecstatically before swinging across the rafters. It wasn't until he saw Sato and Kirishima, two normally very slow students, sliding down their pillar before running towards him so fast it looked like the old Olympics that he really started to wonder if something was wrong. What excited them so much to stop everything and run over? Did their training suck that much, that they were excited to do anything else? Towards the back of the gymnasium, Midoriya finally found a hint of yellow. Across the distance of the entire building, Midoriya would recognize that punk anywhere. His full confidence became genuine as he raised a hand in greeting across the way to his favorite student, Kaminari. Kaminari stared at him for a second, unmoving. He looked down at his hands for some reason, then up at Midoriya. He glanced back where he'd come from, his mouth saying words Midoriya couldn't know, then returned one last time to Midoriya. At this point, he was wondering if Kaminari was even going to come to the front. Kaminari. And so, he called out. Using his free hand, Midoriya cupped his mouth and shouted over the hubbub to speak straight to Kaminari. He then raised his free hand, gesturing the young hero forward. Come on, we've got training to do. Kaminari seemed to be frozen for just 1 second, then crouched slightly. He wiped his face on his sleeve, then rose with a smile so shiny Midoriya could see it from here. And when he rose with his legs flexed, braced against the ground with small sparks coming off his legs. Well, it was hard to say if even Ronin could go as fast as Kaminari ran forward, covering the distance between them like a flash of lightning. Midoriya smiled as he gestured Kaminari over, only fully hesitating as he noticed not a single person from Exam F was slowing down as they got nearer. They really should have slowed down, or else they were at risk of tripping over something like he always managed to. At worst, though, they'd all crash into each other. But even as Midoriya thought this, even as all of Exam F hurried forward, he never considered where they would all crash at, even as Bakugo landed just a few feet out of the way. It wasn't until Mina, Shiro, Sato, and Kaminari all shouted with one voice did he even wonder such a thing when they all shouted together. Sensei, you're alive. Midoriya barely had time to blink, trying to process what they just said. Sensei was obviously him, but I'm what? Even Ronin at his fastest couldn't finish that sentence as he was tackled by Kaminari, then Mina, followed by Shiro, then Kirishima, and every one of them was tackled by Sato, who lifted them all off the ground with one big hug. There was little room for squirming as Ronin was lifted by what felt like 5 hugs at once, threatening to re-break a few of his ribs. The only room in his head was occupied by one question, though, as he was lifted high into the air by cheering people his age, most of them older. What on earth was going on? Chapter end notes. Yo, it's late, but I promised literally no one I'd put out a chapter tonight, and therefore I must. Tonight at my TED Talk, I wanted to talk about my writing method. So I used to use something called the vomit draft, a principle where you get everything ready, you sit down, and you just write. You don't have to like it, you don't have to keep it, you just have to keep writing. Don't know where something should go. Too bad, pick a direction and keep writing. Don't know what's going to go next in the story. Oh well, skip to the next part you do know, then keep writing. The idea is to overcome the initial anxiety of writing by putting something on the page, even if it sucks. Someone in the game design industry said that a bad idea used is better than a good idea never touched, or something to that effect. Besides, as this is just for making a first draft, you can always go back and delete what you've written. But if I spend 3 hours writing a section, and when I go back through on the edit I decide to delete that section, did I just waste 3 hours? I don't have as much time to write as I'd like, namely because I don't have much free time anymore and divide it very messily between everything I want to. That's why I don't want to waste the hypothetical 3 hours, and I usually try to use, reuse, or recycle anything I write. That way I think I'm not wasting my writing time. This tends to create longer and longer moments as I create small but unimportant moments, like them too much, then don't discard them even if I should. It makes things take longer to write, read, and edit, but I like it. Do we strictly need to see Kaminari's struggles trying to uphold Ronin's legacy? What about Bakugo's thought process in creating an ultimate move 4 days early? This might tie into why I like setup and payoff so much. If I can turn these small moments into setups and payoff, it means they weren't wastes of time that I should have cut. They become important because I make them important. Or at least, I try to. This wasn't for y'all, this was for me to write out my thoughts and figure out what the hell was going on today when I was writing. Thanks for coming, thanks for reading, quick edited, and thanks to Ebony Bird of Doom for editing, and thanks for your time. Mary Chrysler, y'all, and adios. Chapter 220, Ronin's story. Chapter summary. Ronin arrives at UA to find nothing as he thought. Sure, Nezu's still scheming, and Aizawa's still being a pain in his ass, and he doesn't understand what any of the students are doing. No, wait, this is exactly what he thought was going to happen. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya was washed over by feelings of confusion and being crushed, the latter literally as 5 people grabbed him from all sides, squeezing him hard enough to break bones in the former as he tried to figure out why on earth was happening. Unceremoniously dropped on his feet, it was only his reaction time that kept him upright as he worked his suddenly sore arms. Around him stood Exam F, having just given him a hug so painful he was pretty sure they left bruises through his armor. Even so, they were all excited and talking at once, making it very hard to actually hear what anyone was saying. Sensei, I knew you'd pull through, not a doubt in my mind. Giving us all heart attacks, you're a mean old man, you hear? Mean. Man, you look even smaller than I remember. What happened to you, Gramps? Whoa, slow down. Midoriya took a slight step back, holding up his hands to try and push back the overwhelming energy. He could see a strange mixture of relief, sadness, and possibly joy as some of the students were getting a little teary-eyed, leaving him clueless about what was going on and why everyone wanted to hug him. I just got here. What's happening? What do you mean? What happened to me? We heard all about what you did at the summer camp. Kirishima shouted out, instantly sending a shiver down Midoriya's spine as he got his second clue what was going on before Kirishima finished. Taking on all those Nomu and that villain just to save us, destroying so much of the forest with your ultimate move, we thought you died, Sensei. Well, that wasn't unreasonable. Midoriya had a soft but slightly uneasy smile as he thought this out in his head. They must have come to the logical conclusion. They'd been at the summer camp too, so they might have somehow noticed his final attack and put together the pieces when he never came back. Still, they didn't have any proof, so he could work with this. Midoriya opened his mouth to create his excuse when Mina blew that up before he could even begin. Aizawa-sensei told us about it. Mina shivered just thinking about it, about the papers Aizawa had read to them. He'd been reluctant to let them read it, holding out that they couldn't read the full obituary till the end. Still, some of the damage report had included bits of Ronin, literally. How the only stuff they found was an eye and some fingers. Do you have a prosthetic hand now? Nice scar, Gramps. Bakugo spoke up from the back, tapping his right eye to reflect Midoriya's own damaged face. A thin white light cut over Midoriya's face where a muscular had hit him so hard it tore his face apart, made worse by Yamato's parting explosion. It was so prominent that Midoriya could only play into his skin, using his makeup to make it larger instead of hiding it. You still got a working eye under that mess. Hell, do you even have eyes anymore? The entirety of Exam F leaned forward for answers. Midoriya didn't even have hell, he didn't even know where to begin. Eraserhead had told Exam F that he died. Why? Everything he'd ever heard about the guy, all the time he'd spent with him, it all pointed to Eraserhead being too lazy to ever do something extra. Why would he put in the effort to inform anyone of Ronin's death? Eraserhead shared all that. Midoriya glanced over at the teacher, stunned. Eraserhead looked just as confused as him, both their gazes turning to Nezu for answers he didn't have, all three unknowing of the full circumstances of the other two. The only people more confused than them was All Might, standing off to one side very confused what was happening. Did Eraserhead lie? Did he really die? Kaminari cut through Midoriya's confusion, grabbing him gently by the hem of his jacket. What really happened in the summer camp? Quote. The summer camp. Revenant scoffed, buying time by repeating some more info and grabbing his thoughts for some order. In times like this, when emotions just spread confusion, it was good to be logical. So he did his best, coming up with a quick short story that fit his needs, then took his time telling it to iron out the kinks. So, Eraserhead must have shared the police reports with all of you. Turning heel, Revenant stood as tall as he could, still shorter than everyone but Mina. He adjusted his jacket, genuinely sorting through his memory for a good place to begin. A lot of truth mixed with a little lying could get him out of this, if he could just get the ratios right. And where to begin? Eraserhead did not lie, not intentionally at least. What he told you, the police reports he showed you, they should all be true. Back in the camp, I ran into several Nomu, more than I could handle. Then I found a villain up by the mountain with even more Nomu. It was a fight I had no chance of winning. Revenant laid out the basic setup, using his own memory to say what happened. One problem he didn't think of beforehand was he didn't know what the report on the summer camp actually included, so he'd have to be as accurate in that part as he could just in case. So instead of fighting, I bought time. Bought time. Exam F was hooked, leaning in at his story. It was probably bad that they were so interested, it'd make it easier for them to spot any slip UPS, but that's what he got for not doing his research. Yes, I bought time. There was a child at the mountain, I'd only gone there in the first place to find him, but the villain got to him first. I had to draw the villain's attention to get him focused on me instead. Revenant paused in his storytelling, then shook his head. Who knew if they even remembered Coda, it was best to stick to important events. Well, that part hardly matters. There was a small reaction as he skipped the pointless part of his story across the students, and a very large one from Nezu who was unsubtly listening in. Gave him a little chuckle before he continued on. What was important was getting the child out safely. The villain and I wound up fighting one-on-one, with the Nomus on all sides to make sure I couldn't escape. Between the villain and the Nomus, I was completely overpowered. There was no chance of winning, so I made sure nobody won. Revenant shrugged, recalling how each of his plans to deal with the villain Muscular and his small army of monsters had failed one by one, and how Midoriya had adapted them on the fly to make sure even their failures succeeded. With a big attack, I injured the Nomus but missed the villain, getting punched through some trees and having a rib pierce my. That's not important either. Even as he skipped it, his hand shifted to his ribcage, the memory of his rib impaling his heart burning with every beat. That wasn't just unimportant, that was definitely something they should not have to hear about. I was going to die regardless, so I used everything I had to take care of the Nomus and the villain. I baited him into coming towards me for one final attack, trying to cut him in half with my old sword while he killed me. Revenant said it so casually, showing hardly a reaction anymore as he talked about his very elaborate suicide. With the Nomus ordered to watch me, they would stay still with the villain's death, but even if they wandered away once the villain was dead, they would still be recovering from injuries. As long as I could kill the villain in the forest, I would buy enough time for that child to get to safety. Ronin pulled forward the bag on his shoulder at this point in the story, unzipping it and rummaging through his training supplies for his ace. It was a stupid plan that only worked by accident. My sword must have cut into my ammunition mid-explosion, creating a chain of detonations that set off all the bullets I had on me, which led to my grenades all going off at once. I am not entirely sure myself, to be honest. From his bag, Ronin grasped the handle wrapped in burnt cloth and drew it. Out of his bag he drew the handle of Yamato, the sword still shattered with only a foot of its blade left, even now it glinted dangerously in the gem's artificial light. However it happened, my sword exploded, then my bombs exploded, and I think after that everything exploded, killing everyone nearby. I was lucky to only lose most of my hand and face, a testament to my body armor. Ronin did his best to tie this in some way as a lesson about heroism, and especially one about body armor. If there was one thing he'd taken away from this whole mess, it was that he really underestimated just how powerful and important the bodysuit was to his operation. After that, I'm pretty sure I almost died of either blood loss or that rib that pierced my heart. Ronin unintentionally gave the grisly detail he'd been trying to hide, taking a second to wonder which of the two would have killed him first. Hardly mattered in the end, because now was time for the bullshit. The last thing I remember before I passed out would be purple fog, I think. The entire scene took a gasp at that revelation. While Ronin had no real known contact with Kurogiri, outside of one time he saw him while they both were intruding at UA at the start of the school year, when they probably knew of the League of Losers' most powerful member, especially by their reactions. Ronin didn't know Kurogiri had been at the summer camp. Not personally, the real last thing he remembered was everything going cold as the world faded out from blood loss. No, it was because he had talked to Kurogiri who all but confirmed it was the smoking comedian who saved him. Unfortunately, he had no idea if anyone else knew Kurogiri had been at the summer camp, but there was a good chance they did because of someone else. The League of Villains had managed to kidnap Bakugo. They either needed someone absurdly strong like Muscular to that, like Kurogiri, or they needed someone with a tricky power, also like Kurogiri. All in all, Kurogiri and his stupid fashion sense were the common denominator, and even if no one saw him there, anyone reasonable would believe he was there. Either way, Kurogiri was likely to be involved, and by the explosions in Bakugo's hands, it seemed the sentient smoke cloud had been on the scene. Ronin couldn't even see the worried looks Nezu, All Might, and Eraserhead exchanged behind his back as he sold his story. By the time I woke, I was in a dark room, an underground basement of some kind if what my partner said was true. Ronin strained his memory, clearly thinking hard to try and describe it. It was hard to see, the only light in there was from some computer screens and some faulty fluorescence. This time Ronin wasn't spinning complete bullshit. He had been in a room like that once, several times in fact, and he was sure All for One owned it because he was describing the room he met All for One in. The very same room where he'd given the supervillain possessed items each time they'd met, but maybe he was getting too into the details. Wherever it was, one of my partners had broken in to rescue me. He checked me into a hospital to recover, but most of my injuries had healed by that time for some reason. Ronin pulled off his gauntlet, showing the back of his hand. It was faint, but one could still see the outline of a scar where his fingers had originally been blown off his hand against where new skin and fingers had grown. He still wasn't exactly sure why All for One had saved him, especially after attacking and jeopardizing one of his plans, but he knew he was only alive because of the supervillain's interjection. However it happened, I spent some time at the hospital off the record recovering. It seems dying really does take a toll on you. Ronin gave a small laugh, sliding the gauntlet back on his hand and strapping it tight. I know that wasn't a great answer. Sorry, but even I don't know all the details of what happened to me when I went out to check where I'd been taken to. I found out Mount Lady had flattened it with a stomp before it became the epicenter for the fight of the century. That part was bullshit again. Midoriya had no idea where All for One had met with him when he exchanged the possessed items since Kurogiri always teleported him in and out. For all he knew, they could have been meeting in America under his dad's workplace. Still, given what he knew about Hell Knight and what damage it had done to Kamino Ward, there wasn't a person alive who could disprove his bullshit save for All for One himself. While it wasn't entirely believable, it didn't have many weak points. Still, it definitely sounded shady. He could guess that All for One might have rescued him from the forest as an act of good faith for the work he'd done for the #1 villain, but no one else knew that. It sounded suspicious as hell. After all, why would the #1 villain in Japan have kidnapped an unconscious and nearly dead vigilante he knew nothing about? It showed that there was some connection between them, but as long as no one could prove it, Midoriya was confident it would fly. So cool. He wasn't prepared as he focused on the kids in front of him, the excitement across all their faces, kids who he was only older than by a few months, at most. One of which he knew for a fact was even older than him. They leaned further forward than ever before with stars in the eyes at his story, throwing Midoriya completely for a loop. Most like Mina and Kirishima seemed excited, nowhere near as excited as Bakugo though as he openly smiled, nodding at Midoriya's mishmash of misinformation. On the other end of the spectrum, Kaminari looked almost in awe at him, eyes and mouth wide open. Now, I think we both know a little of what happened to each other. Ronin pushed on as usual, turning the focus back to what he was here to do, accidentally pushing past the very in-depth discussion Nezu, Eraserhead, and All Might were having behind his back about his story. The League's kidnapping, the cleanup, and now this training for your provisional license exams. Going through all that so quickly, and your provisional license is a year early. Do you do everything so fast? Exam F bloomed into a bunch of smiling faces for some reason. That wasn't really a compliment, it was more of a concern with how fast they took things, and Midoriya was an expert on that if anything else. Going too fast and too hard was something he'd gone through firsthand just months ago. Of course we go fast, Gramps. That's part of being the best. Bakugo butted up, smiling wide as his hands crackled with small explosions. He was excited to keep going fast, already ready to push on to whatever the next thing was. So let's go. You gonna fight us again, or what? Ronin wasn't completely surprised by that, proving his planning had done some good in the end. To start out the summer camp he'd taken on all of Exam F, partially to gauge how good they were, possibly also to give himself an ego boost and beat Bakugo in a one-on-one fight. He was self-aware enough to admit it at least, but after he'd come to work out a few of his issues, fight you again. Why would I need to do that? It was Exam F's turn to be confused again as Ronin put Yamato's remains back in the bag, finally getting to his training stuff. I fought you the first time to learn about you, to see how strong you were at the time, but that was only a month ago. Do you really think you improved enough to make a difference in that time? Ronin was completely genuine in his words. While he would have improved a lot in a month, he'd seen the kind of progress Exam F made in 3. Fuck all. Between the time when they fought him as a training exercise at the start of the year to the aforementioned fight at the training camp, they had barely improved on their own. Even Kaminari, his favorite, had openly admitted that he never practiced the techniques Ronin had taught him. If you really think it's a good idea, though. Exam F took a step away from him for a second, turning their backs on him for a quick huddle about something. They talked in hushed tones, only stopping once so they could all look at him, then went back to talking to one another. Midoriya wasn't sure what they were talking about, but it was likely unimportant. His plan remained unchanged, to do quick training with each to set them up for the rest of the day, then do a more thorough one-on-one training to get into the details. He knew some of the students would want to fight him, like Bakugo, the only student likely to have improved in that 1 month time, but for most of the students he could just skip to the actual training portion. Ronin shook his head at their antics, turning to glance at Nezu over his shoulder. Whatever happened, Gym Gamma was going to be too cramped for his tastes. Nezu, mind if I go next door? We're gonna need a lot more room. It took Nezu a moment to get through Gamma Gym's front door, having to resort to banging on it until someone finally opened the thing and let him in. Aizawa was the first face Nezu saw coming in, having opened the pesky door that barred his way. From the look on his face, Nezu could gather that 1A's teacher was confused, and the genius principal didn't need his quirk to figure it out. Aizawa directed his confusion behind himself, at the vigilante currently being tackled by several students at once, piled so high Nezu could barely see Ronin underneath. Is that? Yes, so it would seem. Nezu didn't hop up on Aizawa's shoulder, staying on the ground to avoid taking advantage of Aizawa's hospitality. If he was any good at reading the room, he was on thin ice already. I don't know all of the details yet, but it appears our favorite vigilante managed to somehow walk out of the summer camp. Quote. How? Aizawa's gaze turned cold, probably assuming that Nezu already knew how Ronin had managed to survive certain doom and just opted not to tell anyone. The thin ice Nezu stood on was cracking as he and Aizawa moved towards the crowd of students, finally letting go of a much more crushed-looking Ronin. How long did you know? I learned that he survived on Hell Night itself, and not by his own hand. I caught wind of him in the action and pieced it together myself. Nezu did his best to clear his name, making his part in everything clear. As for how he survived, even I don't know that. I've been meaning to ask, but after UA nearly got him killed in the summer camp, the topic has been difficult to bring up. Some of Aizawa's ire was sated with that, but it was far from all. So you knew he survived, but you didn't tell anyone. Tell anyone? Wait, do you actually care? It sounded incredibly rude, but Nezu turned back to blink at Aizawa in the most disrespectful way of incomplete honesty. Why on earth would I tell you? You've never been interested in Ronin, you're barely interested when I got All Might to help you teach heroics. That's. Aizawa wanted to snap back, but Nezu's logic was sound. Unless there was something going on that Nezu didn't know about, there was no reason Aizawa would care. But if he cared, oh no. Nezu suddenly snapped around to look at the group of students surrounding Ronin. All members of Exam F, with even the prickly Bakugo standing to one side. And some of them close to tears, as if they knew, you didn't. I thought they deserved to know, Aizawa said through grit teeth. If it was with himself or Nezu, the principal could hardly tell the difference. They do. Or, more so, they did. But what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them. Nezu had deliberately tried to be vague with the whole thing specifically to make it smoother. As long as no one actually said Ronin had died, people would be much less surprised when he turned up alive, as if the odds of his survival were affected by such preconceived notions. Nezu had been trying to avoid those just so Ronin's return could be as smooth as possible. This has turned into quite the predicament. That's an understatement. Aizawa agreed, while still visibly hating Nezu's guts. That was more or less how most people who knew Nezu reacted to him, save for a couple exceptions like the former #1 hero who walked over to join them, a little late on the conversation. Principal Nezu, you decided to swing by here too. Toshinori was wearing casual clothes for once, and something meant for his size. It had been years since Japan's greatest hero wore clothes that fit him, his usual baggy clothes replaced by some old form-fitting ones he'd gotten back when he was first injured. He gestured towards Ronin over his shoulder, whispering to try and be more quiet. Isn't that the vigilante who died at the summer camp? Yes. Sort of. Aizawa took the direct approach while Nezu went sideways as usual, earning the glare from Aizawa and a confused look from Toshinori. Nezu explained himself with a shrug. Well, clearly he didn't die at the summer camp. Did Eraserhead lie? Their conversation was cut off by harsh words from one of the students. Emerging from the pack was a boy with blonde hair, his eyes locked onto his teacher Eraserhead's in anger before moving back to his main target, Ronin, seeking the answers everyone wanted to know. And, to Ronin's surprise, it wasn't Bakugo with that tone, but his favorite student Kaminari. Did you really die? What really happened in the summer camp? All the teachers shut up, listening intently as Ronin looked over the crowd. You could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he thought up his story. Nezu knew it probably wouldn't be the full truth beyond Ronin valuing his privacy and secrecy too much. He had an image to keep up, even if he himself was barely aware of it. Still, there would be some truths in there, truths that Ronin would accidentally reveal. Even the super vigilante didn't know everything, especially when getting embroiled in the ancient war between One for All and All for One. The summer camp. So, Eraserhead must have shared the police reports with all of you. Ronin made a guess, reading the room to get his bearings. Ronin had no way of ever reading them, but he could likely guess what they contained. He started his story in a very unconventional way, by backing up the story of someone else. Eraserhead did not lie, not intentionally. What he told you, the police reports he showed you, they should all be true. Back in the camp, I ran into several Nomu, more than I could handle. Then I found a villain up by the mountain with even more Nomu. It was a fight I had no chance of winning. Ronin's story lined up with the police report, over a dozen Nomus and one large-scale threat villain, Muscular, who had gone dark weeks ago, reappearing as a corpse in UA's summer camp. But with all due respect, destroying someone like him was something far beyond what anyone had expected of a vigilante like Ronin. Someone like Muscular would have been a match for some of the top 10, but for a vigilante. Adding the Nomu on top of that. So instead of fighting, I bought time. Bought time. Everyone listening was drawn in, the students blindsided by such a simple option yet one that was an important ability for heroism, one Ronin had often spoken about in his training methods. The ability to be realistic. Yes, I bought time. There was a child at the mountain, I'd only gone there in the first place to find him, but the villain got to him first. I had to draw the villain's attention to get him focused on me instead. Well, that part hardly matters. What was important was getting the child out safely. Ronin waved off a part of the story everyone was sure they'd like to hear, skipping ahead in the events. The villain and I wound up fighting one-on-one, with the Nomus on all sides to make sure I couldn't escape. Between the villain and the Nomus, I was completely overpowered. There was no chance of winning, so I made sure nobody won. Ronin laughed it off, but most people could see the way he grabbed his own hands, running fingers across his left knuckles, the same fingers that had been found, blown off Ronin's hand. With a big attack, I injured the Nomus but missed the villain, getting punched through some trees and having a rib pierce my. That's not important either. I was going to die anyway, so I used everything I had to take care of the Nomus and the villain. Ronin's hands moved out of sight as he refocused, the vigilante's body blocking Nezu's view as his hands kept moving of their own accord. I baited him into coming towards for one final attack, trying to cut him in half with my old sword while he killed me. Ronin spoke with it so simply, a plan that would surely get him killed. If Muscular hit first, Ronin would probably be a red stain in the forest. If Ronin hit first, there were good odds Muscular would power through and kill Ronin before dying himself. It was a no-win scenario. With the Nomus ordered to watch me, they would stay still with the villain's death, but even if they wandered away once the villain was dead, they would still be recovering from injuries. As long as I could kill the villain in the forest, I would buy enough time for that child to get to safety. It was a stupid plan that only worked by accident. My sword must have cut into my ammunition mid-explosion, creating a chain of detonations that set off all the bullets I had on me, which led into my grenades all going off at once. I am not entirely sure myself, to be honest. Ronin did his best to explain what had happened to him, the true cause of the destruction that tore across the forest. Aizawa glanced at Nezu, but even Nezu wasn't sure if it was really possible. Ronin's sword had very strange properties, being able to create portals that had to be a creation of very advanced technology and the effects of quartz and oh god, there it was. Nezu was pulled from theories to the moment as Ronin drew an old sight from a duffel bag hanging off his shoulder, an old-fashioned handle with burn damage. The metal on it was scratched, the cloth wraps burned and snapped in some place, but his handle gave way to blade, you could still see the edge in that old sword. Or maybe Nezu was just fanboying again as Ronin drew his original sword, the Yamato, a large-handled katana with only a foot of blade left. However it happened, my sword exploded, then my bombs exploded, and I think after that everything exploded, killing everyone nearby. I was lucky to only lose most of my hand and face, a testament to my body armor. Ronin brought up another good point to the students, hitting his chest with a solid thunk. To back his point. After that, I'm pretty sure I almost died of either blood loss or that rib that pierced my heart. Ronin paused for a second over that fun little detail, getting a horrified gasp from his audience he genuinely didn't seem to notice in his own thoughts. The last thing I remember before I passed out would be purple fog, I think. And in 2 words Nezu, Aizawa, and Toshinori went from intrigued listeners to invested heroes. This part was impossible. By the time I woke, I was in a dark room, an underground basement of some kind if what my partner said was true. Eraserhead, All Might, and Principal Nezu leaned forward slightly listening to his description, grim realization dawning in each of their hearts. While Ronin had done many things and seen many more, there were some things even he didn't know that he couldn't know. And that building was all of them. Ronin strained his memory, clearly thinking hard to try and describe it as he cocked his head. It was hard to see, the only light in there was from a wall of computer screens and some faulty fluorescence. A building in the heart of Hell Night, right at the center of the communal ward with hardly a working light to see. There were scarce remnants of computers in the large rooms, from the massive electric bill they traced to the place to the many outlets altered to give more power to massive machines. A building that only existed in reports now, the Nomu storage facility that had been obliterated twice in one night. The reports only existed because of live recordings as the heroes swept through the warehouse, searching for the lost pro hero Ragdoll who had her core taken that night. It was so obvious that both heroes would have been taken to the same place in hindsight, so obvious. Principal Nezu cursed himself for not seeing it sooner. The Nomus returned to that building, Ragdoll had been held in that building, so why wouldn't Ronin? But that led to a more insidious question, a question that few could really ask, even Ronin. Ronin didn't know of All for One, and could only assume he'd been taken back as a hostage of some sort like Bakugo. Eraserhead and All Might didn't know of Ronin, and could only assume he'd been taken back to have his quirk stolen like Ragdoll. Only Principal Nezu could put together the pieces. What would All for One, a supervillain who could both take and give quirks as he pleased, want with the vigilante Ronin, a young man with no quirk but incredible natural talents? Wherever it was, one of my partners had broken in to rescue me. He checked me into a hospital to recover, but most of my injuries had healed by that time for some reason. Ronin gave more credence to Principal Nezu's theory, showing off his left hand to examine fully, including a small scar across the back of his knuckles where his fingers should have been blown off. If All for One had been planning something, why would he want his latest project to start in damaged conditions? Ronin led off from Principal Nezu's theory, going into his own cover-up of events. However it happened, I spent some time at the hospital off the record recovering. It seems dying really does take a toll on you. This would be where the paper trail for Ronin restarted. Izuku Midoriya, civilian identity of the Ronin, had been checked into a hospital around this time following the camping accident by what he called some family friends. Between a student being kidnapped, the number 1 hero retiring then re-entering the workforce as a teacher, and getting all his classes ready for their upcoming exams, Principal Nezu hadn't had time to check into that first hospital visit beyond acknowledging that it happened. He would have to start there, first. Now, that wasn't a great answer. Ronin gave a small laugh, sliding the gauntlet back on his hand and strapping it tight as he covered what Principal Nezu had already figured out. While he investigated the hospital, perhaps he could ask the heroes who'd investigated the Nomu storage for more details on their experience and have someone comb through the evidence with a fine comb. Sorry, but even I don't know all the details of what happened to me when I went out to check where I'd been taken to. I found out Mount Lady had flattened it with a stump before it became the epicenter for the fight of the century. But past it all, what amazed the principal were the parts that he knew were left unsaid. Ronin's mysterious partner, or partners. Perhaps that was Yakuza Hunter, who'd been seen recently with a mysterious figure closely resembling Ronin. The two had fought their way out of All for One's defenses, with only each other for support. Ronin had been hidden away in some small hospital, far from Kamino in the hopes to keep him safe, and Ronin gave up on all of that as he woke into hell, rising to charge in and save All Might just after narrowly escaping himself. So, cool. The words came naturally from Nezu as he stared up at the young man in front of him, without thought. The young man who stood up as straight as he could, surrounded by lies and deceptions covering the truth of who saved the savior of Japan. That young man turned to Nezu, speaking playfully even as exam F continued to act on, enamored by his story. Some were excited, some were proud, and some were even shaken. His face wasn't like most heroes. Scars decorated his face, his tone was a little tired, and he definitely didn't want to be here. But he was. You gonna fight us again, or what? One of exam F's questions caught Nezu's attention, not by his own words but by Ronin's response. Fight you again? Why would I need to do that? Ronin replied so casually it was hilarious, giving exam F a deadpan answer and a small shrug. I fought you the first time to learn about you, to see how strong you were at the time, but that was only a month ago. Ronin looked over his class, back turned to Nezu, but the principal could imagine the cocky smile on the vigilante's face as he spoke. Do you really think you improved enough to make a difference in that time? The sentences challenged, prompting the students to immediately gather up to form a plan. Please, Ronin wasn't fooling anyone. Nezu could see the kendo sticks hidden in Ronin's bag next to Yamato, and why would Ronin bring those if he didn't think he was going to fight exam F? A masterful deceit, straight out of Aizawa's playbook. Ronin turned to face Nezu, asking him for usage of the gym next door for the fights, but Nezu had to calm down from laughing first. There were many shady things around Ronin and so many questions he had to find the time to ask, but one thing was clear through it all. No matter how much Ronin hated it, from dragging himself out of a hospital to save a hero to working with Nezu of all people, Ronin would do what he thought was right. If that wasn't what a hero was, then this school had failed a long time ago. Smintos. Nezu answered Ronin's request with a request of his own, directing the vigilante with just a nod while lending his own aid. When you get a minute, head to Gym Epsilon. We've got a new arena in need of setting up. Chapter end notes. You have to wonder how important Nezu is. Principal Nezu, or Nezu if you're lazy and don't want to go back and edit over 200 chapters to be correct, is an interesting and important character for what probably could be many reasons, but for sake of hypotheticals, only one right now. His intelligence. Nezu being smart is what usually makes him difficult to write, balancing his genius moments with fallings and keeping him limited on what he figure out but what he realistically can figure out. For example, it took Nezu a while to figure out that Ronin was quirkless simply because a quirkless person doing what Ronin was seemed so far-fetched and illogical. Once he did, however, figuring out who Ronin really was under the mask was just a hop, skip, and a jump. Nezu knowing things isn't just part of writing though, it's a crucial point in Ronin as Nezu is the main reason Ronin is treated so well by the few heroes he interacts with. What Nezu knows and doesn't know can massively change how the harrowing world views Ronin, from some random vigilante punk to the man who single-handedly destroyed a mountain and forest in 1 minute, putting him in league with the top half of the top 10 heroes. Sure, we know that latter feat was a fluke and not something repeatable, but would the world if that feat was released? Would they care? Nezu's knowledge of Ronin and trust in him is a crucial part of Ronin's vigilante life, beyond just giving him technology and trade for teaching. If Ronin and Nezu were on truly bad terms, if Nezu knew of the dealings Ronin had made with All for One, he couldn't destroy Ronin easily but he could wreck his civilian life. In turn, the story would take a turn as Midoriya fought heroes and villains alike for his beliefs, delving deeper into Ronin and Wraith until there was no Midoriya to come back out. Ronin and then Wraith would be able to show how rotten and weak hero society truly has become without restraint, and perhaps Ronin's first willing kill would have been very different. One could say that, in a way, Nezu and All for One act as the balancing points of the entire FIC. Neither one fully supports their own cause anymore, but their existence and incompatibility has drastically shaped how this FIC turned out. If Ronin picked one side fully, if he could sideline his own beliefs to work inside a system, things could be a lot easier. Oh, to dream. The what ifs of a what if fanfic, and a bunch of ideas too confusing to get stuck in. The point that I was going to say originally was that Nezu's incorrect guesses aren't just jokes, they're the important points that the entire FIC balances on. As much as Ronin fights against crime, his hardest fight might be the battle of wits he engages against the furry fucker himself. Nezu's mistakes are Ronin's victories, his breakthroughs his own. As the battles come and go, however, no one can say how the war will end. Thanks for reading my philosophies. My editor is busy having a fun time, so this is my bad ideas straight from my noodle. Hope you enjoyed it in my little essay, but it's time for goodbye, so adios amigos. Chapter 221, next. Chapter summary. Ronin's fights with Exam F. Some go as expected, some don't, but Ronin expected to not expect everything, so does it really count? Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya, Smintos, and all of Exam F moved from Gym Gamma where the rest of 1A was training next door, to another identical blank gym Midoriya couldn't be fucked to learn the name of. As they made their way over, Midoriya gave Smintos some quick instructions for how to set up the gym while he talked to the kids. The gym was massive on the inside, and it really showed when it was empty. Coming in it had no structure set up so far, giving it a massive echo and really letting it sink in just how big it was. Midoriya's had first guessed they were around the size of the firing range he trained it with Mao, but now he could see that one gym wasn't even half the size of the range. A shame that they had over 20 of the things all lined up in a row, really outshining their firing range in scale if not size. The gym wouldn't stay so empty for long, Smintos getting to work changing the scene as Midoriya had asked while the vigilante turned to address the kids following him. It was strange to consider people his age or older kids, but comparing how they handled themselves, how he handled himself, and how they handled him, it seemed more natural than you think. Especially with the experience gap between them, like just how many fights they've been in. Speaking of fights. So, does everyone want to fight me? Revenant wasn't surprised as everyone agreed, some raising their hands and cheering for some reason, but he still shook his head. Even if it was expected, it was still a little baffling. Alright, let's get the rules out of the way first and fast. Revenant grabbed his own jacket by the lapel, pulling it out of the way to show off the combination of bulletproof vest and muscle suit underneath. I've got body armor. I can take almost anything you can dish out. Fight me as if you're fighting a real villain to detain me, not to kill me. Revenant still had his duffel bag for a few props, drawing one of the kendo sticks from it and holding it high so everyone could see. Second, none of you wear body armor, so I'll be using this. This is a shinai, a practice sword used in kendo, but for today it's a real sword. If you get hit with this, we'll treat it like you got hit with a real sword. Everybody got that? Everyone nodded as Midoriya rested the shinai against one shoulder and slid his duffel bag off the other, tossing it gently to the floor to get it out of the way. Lastly, a few questions while Smintos finishes up. Who here is training to become a combat hero? Heroism was divided into a few fields, mainly combat and rescue heroes. There was a third category, support heroes like Principal Nezu, but they were much rarer and Midoriya wasn't as concerned with them at the moment, especially as every single student raised their hands to becoming the combat hero. You probably noticed in our last fight, but fighting in the woods is very difficult. Midoriya adjusted his stance, giving a quick glance over the gym as it transformed. Worse, it's a far cry from what you'd be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. The gym had been transformed into a small replica of a city block. Smintos, as Midoriya had suspected, was in charge of creating the faux buildings. Having created so many over the years, Smintos could now toss a few together in his sleep as long you gave him a second. Sure, the streets were a little more narrow and the buildings were pretty small, but it'd be good enough for the exercise. Fighting in natural environments is annoying. Uneven ground, a small visual range, and random obstacles make it hard to keep track of what's happening in a fight. Midoriya brought everyone's memories of their past fights back, chasing and being chased through a mountain, trying to find him in a mess of trees, and those same trees and other problems like smaller bushes and rocks getting in the way as they fought. Now, this isn't a flaw with UA, and your Principal Nezu hasn't gone crazy. The reason you were in that forest wasn't to fight, it was to train, and no one cares if you blow up half a forest while training. A city block, on the other hand. Now the gym had fully transformed into the block Ronin had been thinking of, a small-scale city that was entirely gray concrete. Midoriya strutted into the pseudo-city, giving Smintos a quick nod of appreciation and continuing his speech to explain this training. This city block has flat ground. Long empty streets give you a longer sight line. Last of all, this city is even cleaner than a real one. No random garbage on the street to trip on, no light posts to get caught up inside attacks, and no civilians to try and protect. It's just you. Ronin spun on his heel, tapping a finger confidently against his own chest as he stared Exam F down. And me. 3-minute bouts, 10 seconds breaks, 1 fight each. Ronin laid it out clearly, his eyes flicking from student to student to get his point across. Am I understood? Yeah, Gramps. Yes, sir. Yeah. Damn straight. Good. No point in wasting time. Nodding his head, Ronin took a final step into the city while shifting into a guard. First come, first serve. Someone step up. Damn straight. Ronin couldn't help smiling as Bakugo bowled past the other students with a smile and one explosive entrance, flying straight towards him with both hands blazing. He might not be sure how this turned out, but damn he was going to enjoy this. Bakugo and Ronin moved across the small city quickly, Bakugo moving in with a constant attack to keep Ronin on the back foot. Flying with his explosions and lining up power shot after shot, Bakugo literally pushed Ronin around the city. Ronin was constantly moving, running and jumping from buildings to keep ahead of the blonde bomber. Even as he chased, though, Bakugo could feel that he wasn't in control of the fight. While Ronin had been mobile in the forest, that wasn't his area of expertise. Trying to use the trees to his advantage, turning the rough ground against his opponents while Ronin had seemed to do well, that was all improvised. The city streets went two ways, the students weren't the only ones enjoying a better fight arena. At mid-range, Bakugo was firmly the harasser using his explosions to move towards Ronin while attacking him. It was his desire to move closer though that turned against him after Ronin jumped up from the streets to the top of a one-story building, suddenly turning to fight at close range once Bakugo tried to follow him up. Bakugo had accidentally closed the distance between them for Ronin, saving the vigilante the trouble of trying to get past those explosions of his. The first big attack landed mid-air as Ronin jumped off the building, kicking off the wall as he fell to get an unusual angle and striking Bakugo once in the stomach with his shinai. Bakugo was knocked back, winded, but managed to catch himself and land on his feet despite the hard knock. First point to me, again. Ronin deliberately taunted him, having also landed on his feet. Last time they thought he'd switch to using his pistols, but this time it seemed he'd go with the sword the whole way. I thought you were going to show me how you improve. Improve. Bakugo brushed off his stomach, hands crackling. He moved to chase, stepping forward a single step before throwing up his hands. I'm a whole different beast now. Scattershot. Bakugo placed his hands loosely together, barely focusing in before launching a rapid series of explosions from one hand. Fireballs soared through his focused hands at Ronin, who was admittedly surprised at how fast they fired. Ronin barely had time to sidestep the first before taking one to the shoulder, the impact knocking him back. Another slammed into his leg, then his torso, landing with a solid punch as they battered him back. Now this is more like it. With a small step, Ronin turned himself sideways to Bakugo, so only his shoulder faced his opponent and created a much smaller target. With one hand, Ronin kept shinai trained on his opponent as the other fished something off his belt. A thin domino mask latched itself over top Ronin's bandana, followed by the helmet he threw over top and locked into place. Bakugo grinned as Ronin suited up, his arms aching from the constant strain as his explosions tried to throw his arms apart. Gritting his teeth, Bakugo instead focused his arms in more, pushing against the force of the explosions to bring that focus in. AP shot. The first explosion missed Ronin as he sidestepped it, the second missing similarly as Ronin weaved the other way. Bakugo tried to focus his arms on the slimmer target of Ronin's sideways form, but that was right when Ronin really began to move. Ronin used his mobility to suddenly advance, moving forward and slightly side to side to disrupt Bakugo's attacks. In just seconds they went from 40 feet between them to 20, then to 10. At such a close range, Bakugo was sure he'd be able to easily hit the vigilante, but it was harder than he thought as Ronin shifted gears. Instead of moving forward quickly and moving sideways slightly, Ronin suddenly spiked sideways and barely moved forward to majorly throw off Bakugo's aim. Ronin was incredibly close, just a second away from hitting Bakugo, but too far off to the side for Bakugo to properly turn in time. He couldn't hit Ronin with his AP shot. Stop hyper-focusing. Bakugo barely had time to blink before he released his arms, pointing both palms down and releasing a massive blast straight at his own feet. Hero and Vigilante alike were knocked apart, one switching back to being airborne while the other landed gracefully on the slightly broken street. If he focused too much on using his new moves, Bakugo would get his ass kicked by something he should have been able to tear apart. As long as he wasn't too focused, don't rely on the AP shot. It's just another tool for times like this. Bakugo created one larger explosion to lift him higher before slamming his hands together, firing an AP shot at Ronin while midair. His hands lit up as the aspiring hero grinned, before releasing another well-aimed blast and being launched further back. Glancing up, Ronin smiled as Bakugo stopped trying to force his new move into a scenario it didn't fit. That range attack was good against targets who couldn't react fast, not a speedy swordsman running all over a city. Unless, of course, you blew him up, threw him across the street, and then fired it while he was getting up. Could he have dodged the incoming explosion? If he got up faster, definitely, or if he tried using one of his other weapons. Still, the sight of Bakugo's progress with a move they had created just a month ago in the woods was something special and made him very glad he put on his helmet as an explosion slammed into his face, rocking his world. Next, Kirishima and Ronin led a mostly grounded fight in the street, with the two standing a little over 3 feet apart and just wailing on each other. Fists crashed into each other as Kirishima used his quirk the best he could, toughening his fists and body up to endure the beatdown Ronin unleashed. This was fairly comfortable for Ronin, who was used to criminals throwing hands and knives almost every day. Every time he bashed a gang around, there had to be at least one guy who wanted to bring fists to a claw fight. Ronin normally could have just eaten the punches with his bodysuit, but to force both of them to improve, he deliberately dodged as much as he could, even trying to dodge attacks he normally wouldn't. The 3-minute brawl had no real breaks as Kirishima powered through what he could. Starting out he pushed his quirk hard, hardening everything while exchanging fisticuffs with his smaller opponent. Both locked their feet in as they threw punch after punch, the first 30 seconds becoming a mess as both threw out as many punches as they could. Even if they didn't move, though, they each had their own methods to keep going. Ronin weaved and writhed even where he stood, dispersing Kirishima's punches by moving with them or sliding out from under them. He might not have been relying on his suit's durability, but he wasn't making this easy. And on the other hand, Kirishima didn't even think about dodging. He kept his feet planted, legs bent slightly, and ate every blow with body strong and spirit stronger. He took the opposite approach to Ronin's, leaning into every attack and using his arms as shields. For the first 30 seconds, Kirishima kept his entire body hardened, fully absorbing every hit without flinching. For the next minute, Kirishima managed to keep his arms hard, blocking most attacks while barely batting an eye. After that, Kirishima kept his hands as hard as he could, pushing through the pain to keep going even as his quirk was pushed to the limit. In the last 10 seconds, Kirishima grabbed Ronin by his coat, hardening his head and slamming it into Ronin. Ronin took a single step back, grabbing Kirishima by the straps of his costume, and slammed his head right back. The two headbutted 2 more times before the timer ran out, Kirishima's legs giving out underneath him as the exhaustion of pushing his quirk overcame him. Next. While Sato and Ronin fought in the pseudo-city, the rest of Exam F watched with Smintos from the sidelines. Smintos stuck around to supervise and to fix any damage to the city between fights, but it was likely that Bakugo was the only one who would be destroying anything. The rest of Exam F got to watch the fight through the gym's camera system, a system in place both to watch how the trainees practice from a safe distance and to monitor them for safety reasons. As the ceiling camera zoomed in on the fighters, though, it was a little hard to tell what was happening. Ronin kept himself on the back foot for the first minute, letting Sato chase him. His movements were deliberately slower than when he fought Bakugo, letting the hero have a chance of catching him, but he didn't give up entirely. Small motions evaded Sato's grasp as the larger hero moved in to try and grab the vigilante, backsteps instead of backflips to evade Sato's hands. As he moved back, Ronin kept his sword up, defending against Sato's advance with retreating attacks. Every time Sato tried to engage, Ronin's sword would come flying in to disrupt him. You should think about getting body armor of some kind. Since Sato had no armor, Ronin's sword was uncontested. Sato couldn't block it like Kirishima, and he couldn't attack around it like Bakugo. He had to get close to his opponent, playing into his own weakness. Even just protection on your arms could help. Like, yours. Sato's words came in short bursts as he breathed heavily, pushing himself hard as he moved around Ronin. With a powerful jump he moved to Ronin's side, away from that sword, but Ronin adjusted with a much smaller turn of his heel to bring them face to face again. To make his point, Sato raised an arm as he stepped in to face that sword. Ronin wore big scary-looking metal gauntlets, and if Sato had something like those, he could do this. Sato stepped into Ronin's range, blocking Ronin's Chennai with his forearm and muscling his way past to attack the vigilante directly. If that Chennai was a real sword, this would be impossible for the current him, but with some kind of armor on his arms. Ronin flicked his sword off of Sato's arm to attack him while retreating, but with an option to fight back, Sato couldn't be shaken as easily. Ronin still retreated at the same speed, but Sato could now advance through his guard and use all his muscle to push through it instead of trying to get around it. Once Sato muscled past that sword, he finally found some traction and possibly made the best round so far, especially when he accidentally slammed his elbow into the Chennai and snapped the thing clean in two. Once their fight was over, Sato was more than a little apologetic, but Ronin just saw him off with a smile and a wave of his hand as he went to grab a new Chennai. Thank God he brought spares. Next. Zero's match was just as hard to watch, not because of how far the fighters were from the cameras and how small their movements were, but because how close they got and how large their movements became. Making good use of both buildings and rafters, Zero had the run of the city in his back pocket. With just one arm and a swing he could cover entire streets, showing off the practice he put into controlling his body as he soared through the air. Playing into his challenger's strengths, Ronin was mobile, letting Zero make use of options he never could hope in the forest, where the largest objects were trees under 20 feet tall. He'd already seen Zero fight in close quarters, so it was only fair to let him stretch his wings and show what he was good at. One might ask how two people could fight when one was swinging around the city and the other was only using a dull sword. Ronin was wondering too as the fight started, until a human-sized wrecking ball swung past him from up high with enough force to send him flying. Ronin stepped back after Zero's miss, turning to face his opponent as Zero swung like a pendulum, creating a new line of tape to swing from while cutting his old one. Zero spun midair, cutting his own momentum short to come in for another attack. Ronin braced for the impact, anchoring himself into the ground with his sword ready to hit Zero as he swung past. When Zero swung in, he'd sidestep and strike, hitting Zero while avoiding his massive swings. Ronin lined up his attack, trying to gauge Zero's path just as Zero cut his own tape short, switching directions once again. While Ronin could keep focused on Zero with just a turn of his heel, even he had a hard time keeping track of Zero as he swung around the vigilante, purposely never engaging and instead swinging around and around. In just a minute there was tape strands everywhere, decorating the surroundings like streamers. In fact, it was almost getting hard for Ronin to move, since the double-sided tape was even starting to build up on the streets. Oh shit, nice. Ronin dropped his sword completely as he took in his surroundings. What had started as a city block had transformed into a web of tape, the threads stretching across the streets and buildings to transform it from an arena to a cage. He couldn't help smiling as he glanced up at the young hero swinging overhead as he jumped from building to building, creating another ring of tape to keep Ronin wrapped in this one block without even exchanging a single attack. Ronin laughed as he put his sword away, clearly not needing it for this fight, and instead worked to try escaping his tape prison before it became truly impossible. He rushed across the road, easily stepping over the strips of tape and heading for one of the buildings that was turning into a wall. It'd be best to get out by getting up, but Zero had no plans of that happening. As Ronin sprinted to the closest building, Zero swung to the closest vigilante with a spare piece of tape. Ronin glanced back, jumping out of the way as Zero barreled past, turning the tape into another snare as he attached to the floor. Zero slowed himself between his tapes, standing comfortably on the side of a building looking down at Ronin. Going somewhere, Gramps. Yeah, up. It was Zero's turn to be surprised as Ronin sprinted straight at the wall, activating Beowulf as his claws and boots slammed into the concrete and stuck fast. It only took Ronin a second to adjust to the wall, crawling up rapidly straight towards Zero. Wait, you can do that. Zero panicked for a second, cutting loose the tape on the floor to better position himself with both tapes stuck to the building wall. I can do a lot of things. The wall was rough, perfect for getting a grip into. Ronin took one hand off the wall as he climbed, drawing his shinai as he got closer to make this more interesting. Oh, shit. Zero laughed before jumping off the wall, bungee jumping towards Ronin with one piece of tape still holding him fast to the wall. Ronin adjusted his fighting stance the best he could, gripping his sword hard as the pair clashed on the side of a wall. Next. While Zero's battle had started high speed and switched into a cage match, Mina's was all speed all the time. Theirs wasn't so much a chase as there was constant repositioning as Mina slid through the city streets, using her high maneuverability to harass Ronin from range by lobbing acid. Ronin cut out most of his vertical movement when fighting Mina, only using it to get around her and her massive supply of acid. Whether he was running towards or away from the heroine, she made sure he was on his toes unless he wanted to take a glob of acid to the face. They ran through the streets, Mina doing her best to keep Ronin locked in the mid-range and only taking serious losses when Ronin started to use the confusing layout of the city against her. Both times he laid her out came after breaking her line of sight, once by ducking into an alley to come out overhead and once when both of them had ran straight towards a wall, Ronin jumping into then backflipping off of it to get behind her quickly. Even with his hits and tricks, Mina's balance was impressive. It was shown most not in how she improved since they last fought, her range attacks were definitely better, and she wasn't stupid enough to try fighting up close this time but shown by how little her skill had degraded while fighting on the uneven ground of the forest. Normally mobile fighters like Zero and Bakugo had been limited by the forest, the abundance of trees serving to block their mobility. Zero could barely swing with the trees so low, and Bakugo had to go above the trees to fly freely. Mina, though, had just used her impressive balance to skate over and around the roots and rocks of the forest, much how Ronin did. So, while she didn't look that different, her constant skill no matter the terrain impressed Midoriya even if she didn't always think far enough ahead, as Ronin broke line of sight for another ambush. Next. With no sight of Monoma, the sixth battle would be between Kaminari and Ronin. Tossing his partially melted Shinai aside, Ronin was running out of spare swords. He'd only brought 3, so that meant either here Kaminari would have to use a real sword, and it only made sense for Kaminari to stick to the real deal. No sense in hampering his student because he forgot how destructive Exam F was. Walking into the city, Kaminari and the Ronin were a small ways apart. Despite the Ronin's smaller size, his image was massive in Kaminari's eyes. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it after everything he'd seen, that Ronin had returned. Appearing and disappearing from his life at the drop of a hat. Appearing during his entrance exam, in a random park across town, as a test for all of 1A to fight against. Disappearing without a trace after training him, once Stain was beaten and Kaminari had finally started to catch up to him. Vanishing with a flash in the darkest hour of the summer camp, leaving only a trail of words in an obituary report. After a month of being gone. Are you really back? Kaminari stopped, surprised. He hadn't meant to say anything, but his thoughts were so jumbled that one slipped out. True to form, the Ronin immediately noticed something, stopping as well to turn and face Kaminari. Did you say something, Kaminari? Even just standing a dozen feet apart, the Ronin before him was a stark difference from Kaminari. The way he kept one hand on his sword, ready for anything. His perfect posture standing upright, combat alert at all times. Everything from the way he walked to the way he talked, it was all so cool. But it's nothing, teach back quote. Kaminari brushed it off, rubbing the back of his head to try and brush off the niggling doubts in the back of his mind. He was glad to see the Ronin again, his master. It was amazing that they met again, after Ronin had supposedly died. From the story he told, he'd almost died anyways. The fact that Ronin was standing here before him was a miracle. Don't be so formal, Kaminari. The Ronin smiled, but in that smile Kaminari could see the scars across Ronin's face. Ones he didn't recognize, new ones like the one that crossed his eye. But also some old ones that looked misplaced. Something on your mind? I'm not sure. It was strange, but Kaminari remembered that Ronin had 3 scars over his eye already, like some wild beast clawed his face. With his latest injury to the same eye, that should have made 4, but the middle scar was missing. Kaminari didn't know if that was how scars work yet, if the middle scar was gone because of a new, bigger scar. Maybe the skin with the old scar was torn off. But he didn't know what he saw, and he saw that something had changed about the man calling himself Ronin. Kaminari had originally decided he'd fight second, to go as soon as possible, but something made him change his mind. In his fight with Bakugo, not once had he created a portal like he used to. Kaminari assumed that was his master's quirk, the ability to make portals, not mind reading like he first assumed when he met the man. But even if the Ronin was just holding back more than the other times, other things during the fights cropped up. The Ronin was slower than the last time he'd seen him, slower than ever before. Where he once made large moves and crushed his opponents in an instant, now he moved in small steps around his opponents. He could still do some fancy moves, but they were fancier than Kaminari ever remembered his master doing. Quote Moss no, Ronin. Maybe the scar had changed because of his new injury, maybe he was just holding back on his quirk, and maybe he was just moving slower because of his injuries. But that was a lot of maybes. Kaminari wasn't the brightest bulb, but he knew how to count. Instead of 3 maybes, maybe there was just 1 maybe. Eraserhead's report, the disappearance of Ronin, and the sudden change on his return. Did they think he wouldn't notice? Righting himself, Kaminari reflected his teacher's lessons and what he learned from them. He bent his legs, straightened his back, and gripped the katana on his hip so hard his knuckles went white. His tried to lock eyes with his master, but his golden eyes only met the hazy black of the Ronin's bandana, unable to see past it. Did everyone think he was that dumb, that he wouldn't notice the changes? That he couldn't see the signs? That they could give his name to anyone, that someone could pretend to be him and no one would notice? Kaminari took a deep breath, drawing on the first lesson he ever learned. If he had a question, it was best to ask it. So he pushed onward, his usual goofy demeanor gone as something burned in his chest like the electric sparks he unconsciously gave off as his thumb pressed against his katana tsuba, inching out of the saya as he addressed the man in front of him. You're not the real Ronin, are you? Chapter end notes. Yo, just swinging by with my favorite part of writing, the fights. Especially the not fights, cause Zero's fight was definitely my favorite even if it was the hardest to explain. Trying to think of synonyms for swing and tape was a lot harder than I thought it'd be. Other than that, some rare proof that I can still write fast when all my D&D goes on break. Good to know. All of Exam F might have been fired up, but not all of them can show how they've improved since they last fought Ronin. After all, not all of them have improved since they last fought Ronin. Bakugo improved his long-range attacks, getting better at aiming them with practice. Kirishima learned how to block with more than just his face. Sato, Zero, and Mina didn't improve as much as just show how good they always were in ways they couldn't the last time they fought. Context is important. Don't think I'm forgetting anything else, so I'm glad we can get to training now. It should be fun, and there will be no Kindle-like battle next chapter. I have not been practicing writing sword fights, just doing some research so Exam F can improve in fights. Well, I guess that's it this time. Thanks for swinging by, and adios amigos. Chapter 222, Screaming Softly in the Storm. Chapter summary. Stress builds and builds like static, gathering and growing into a spark. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. You're not the real Ronin, are you? 2 figures stood a small ways apart in a small foe city. There was no wind that blew through its fake streets, no people in its fake buildings, and no look of surprise or agitation in its fake Ronin. The 2 figures faced each other, hands resting against their still sheathed swords. Kaminari was tight and compact, his muscles twitching slightly as he leaned forward. His thumb pressed against the tsuba, pushing it out of the sheath just like his master taught him. The man was relaxed and loose. He stood tall, still shorter than Kaminari, his hand draped over his katana limply. He didn't even have a guard as he faced down Kaminari, no protection of sword or words in Kaminari's way. I've seen you fight. Kaminari attacked, his hand shaking as he clenched his sword harder. You're too slow, and you don't have his quirk. As the man turned to face Kaminari, facing him head-on, Kaminari instinctively stepped back into the side, making sure not to stand directly in front of his opponent. Always keeping his opponent in front of him, while making sure he never stood in front of them, a basic fighting tactic Kaminari had been taught over the summer camp. You might look like him, but you're not. As the man kept making his stupid little adjustments, Kaminari imitated the larger moves he'd seen his master make, his legs crossing each other for only a moment as he created his rhythm. You might sound like him, but you're not. Kaminari's movements had turned into circling, moving around his opponent while trying to gauge him. There was no defense, nothing to stop Kaminari as he attacked again and again. You might act like him, but you're not. You can't fool me. Kaminari suddenly switched the way he circled, moving against the grain to create a weak point. As the man turned the wrong way, Kaminari lunged forward, activating his sheath and shooting his sword into his hand for his opening attack. Kaminari's katana flew from his sheath into his hands as he stepped in before slamming it down at the fake before him, trying to cut right through with his dull blade. The man barely moved. His hand was still lying lax on his sword as he adjusted around Kaminari's attack, avoiding it with just a simple sidestep. The man turned on his heel, literally stepping around Kaminari's attack, but giving no counter. I don't know who you are, or what you think you're doing, but I want answers. Kaminari stepped further in, swinging his sword violently as he moved in. He threw out attack after attack, coming in at the same angle each time. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Overhead after overhead was thrown as the man moved back, avoiding Kaminari's attack without even trying to go for his own weapon. Are you serious? The earlier matches had shown how defensive this man was. He didn't overwhelm his opponents like Ronin had, with incredible speed or flashy motions. In fact, he was barely responding at all. Say something, damn it. Kaminari clung to his sword even harder as he swung over and over, his teeth grit just as hard as his fingers. For all the strength he put in, though, it was unfocused. He was putting so much muscle into just holding his sword that his attacks were clunky and sluggish. Big exaggerated moves were easy to pick apart. Say what? Two motions stopped Kaminari's advance in its tracks. Planting his feet, the man lunged forward, cutting down the distance between them and blocking Kaminari's attack with an attack of his own. He didn't draw his sword though, no, instead the man stepped forward and slammed his still-sheathed sword pommel first into Kaminari's dull blade, catching it mid-swing and stopping it before it could gain any real momentum. Ski. Kaminari kept his guard up, backpedaling, but the man cut through his defenses just by walking forward, keeping his own sword sheathed. He didn't need to attack Kaminari, his mere presence cut deeper than Kaminari could have ever anticipated. I am Ronin. The man pushed his sword back onto his hip, walking towards Kaminari's shaking defense with a confidence unlike almost any Kaminari had ever seen. Not loud like All Might, not violent like Bakugo, not even stoic as Todoroki, just a quiet confidence that weathered through the threats but had the power to push them right back. I am not Ronin. Kaminari drew his sword down again for another attack, and again it was met by the man's pommel. He drew his sword off his hip in motion, grabbing it by the sheath and thrusting it into Kaminari's sword. The metal pommel met Kaminari's blade, the two dull edges clashing but not quite rolling off each other. Kaminari's edge tried to slide off to one side, but the man's superior blade control kept them locked as he moved in close to Kaminari. Does it make a difference? Banana met eyes, seeming unbelievably cold as the man took a final step in with their blades still locked. Never wavering, the man thrust his sword forward, pressing both his and Kaminari's blades safely against Kaminari's body, then powering through and knocking Kaminari back with his own sword. The boy stumbled as the man held his sword out pommel first, still unsheathed. I am here to teach you to see how far you've come. Slowly, the man took a step back, returning to a neutral position as his sheath slid back along his body before resting at his hip once again. So show me how much you've grown. Show you. Kaminari's eyes were cloudy and slightly red as he stared up at the man standing before him. But in this moment, he finally found focus, grabbing his sword hard with one hand as he pushed himself off the ground. Show you. A small spark ran through Kaminari's body as he put his feet under him, finally connecting the real reason he could tell this guy was fake. That reason pushed Kaminari to his feet, a shock to his systems that jolted him into focus, giving him a better direction to come at this from. Oh, I'll show you all right. I'll show you exactly why you're fake. Kaminari engaged again with the fraud, stepping in with an overhead attack, missing and then flicking his sword in from the side. It wasn't much, but it was the most complicated attack Kaminari had done so far. The fraud had stepped aside to dodge Kaminari's first attack, but as the sword approached him from the side, the fraud finally had to block it. The fraud still barely moved, turning his blade to face Kaminari and partially drawing it, catching Kaminari's sword with the foot of blade he unsheathed before returning it back to its sheath. The real Ronin would have followed up. Kaminari shouted as he stepped in, flicking his sword again from the same side before flicking it into an overhead. Again, the fraud partially drew his sword to block Kaminari's flicker and stepped around Kaminari's attack, but it took noticeably more effort now, the fraud moving faster and almost getting it by it this time. So, the fraud bounced slightly on his feet as Kaminari turned it up a gear, both taking a moment to prepare themselves before moving faster. Kaminari came in with more attacks, weaving together his overheads and flickers as he came at the fraud, and in turn the fraud better weaved together his dodging and blocking. While Kaminari poured his all into this, the fraud could only seem to put in the bare minimum, and that was the problem. As their swords met again, Kaminari could freely admit this guy was good at fighting better than him, anyway. Able to handle so many attacks by just walking, barely blocking, and never counterattacking. It was in those motions though that Kaminari realized exactly why he knew this guy was a fake. You can never be the real Ronin, because, instead of breaking off, Kaminari leaned into his sword, pushing with all his might to move the fraud back even a single step but he didn't have the strength. The fraud's sword was close to his body, still partially sheathed, and the fraud slipped into an easy defensive stance to brace against his sword. His attention was locked onto Kaminari's sword, but he only used his sword with one hand, still not taking this seriously. It wasn't that he was relaxed, it was that he didn't seem to care right until Kaminari took a small step back and launched his foot up, kicking past the fraud's guard and knocking him back a step. The real Ronin would have criticized me for not practicing. The fraud took only a single step back to adjust, barely affected and far from injured by Kaminari's attack until Kaminari built distance, flipping his sword around while sheathing it and crouching his legs. Boom. And bursting forward at his slightly toppled foe, drawing his sword and striking from the side in one fluent motion. This time his opponent had to jump backward to avoid the blade, then draw his sword fully to block the next attack as Kaminari continued forward with a string of attacks. The real Ronin would have noticed I hadn't used the thunderclap and flash yet. The direction changed, no longer just from above or the side, but every angle possible as Kaminari put his spirit into these attacks. The real Ronin would have powered through these weak-ass attacks. One small spark ran down Kaminari's face, then turned to hundreds as his body electrified. He moved into his opponent's range, sword meeting sword and body bashing body as Kaminari rammed himself into this fraud's frame. The real Ronin wasn't thrown off by anything. The hero killer. Kaminari disengaged from Ronin's sword but stayed close, pulling his sword back just to slam the pommel into the fake's ribs. The no moves. The fake stepped back to build distance as Kaminari grabbed his coat, well worn by time and fights, then slammed the two of them together skull first. A droplet of blood ran down Kaminari's brow as he locked eyes against his enemy, throwing a quick punch into the man in front of him's face. And especially some weak-ass student. Kaminari grabbed at the man's head as he activated his quirk, the air filling with energy as the fraud shoved him off, escaping Kaminari's million-volt shot by launching him backward. The boy hit the ground hard, rolling off concrete and grabbing his sword before lunging forward with another thunderclap and flash. The distance between them was covered in an instant as Kaminari bolted forward, gripping his sword with both hands as he brought it crashing down. Not by fighting me. As the fake before him moved on, Kaminari and his blade both pushed on. They struggled through the force of their own attack to suddenly change direction and attack again, turning and attacking in a new direction. And not by fucking training me, either. The fake mentor and the fraud student met, their blades clashing harder than ever as Kaminari leaned into his attack, so concentrated that the world around them seemed to disappear in Kaminari's watery eyes. He'd scold me for skipping training, alright, but he'd notice me. Kaminari stepped forward, one fake slamming into another as their faces met again. Something wet stained the black bandana between them as Kaminari tried to break through. The effort I put in, the way I felt, he'd notice it all, and he'd talk about it. But you. Another surge overtook Kaminari, electrifying the air around them as they met. No longer could the fake escape by shoving Kaminari back, so he instead suddenly built distance, getting nipped by the sparks as he escaped, still barely putting in the energy. You're not trying. Kaminari stayed on his feet, blood running down his face as his mind clouded, then pushing through it with flashes of anger. All these small moves, these stupid little steps, these weak ass fights, I don't give a shit if you're holding back, at least take me seriously, damn it. The man before him stumbled for a step, pulling back to stare at the hero before him, expression shifting from surprise to a soft smile. He leaned forward, finally drawing his sword as Kaminari pushed on. The currents that covered Kaminari's body were pulled inside as the hero closed his eyes, remembering his master's words, the legacy he'd been left in the notes he had studied so recently. The first thing they ever trained inside UA's gates, a new way for Kaminari to use his quirk. His legs bent, tense as the electricity running through him focused through his body. Under the skin, around the bones, and into his muscles, Kaminari redirected his quirk to release the energy inside his body instead of out, heightening his reaction time to as fast as he could fire off his quirk. He'd spent hours practicing this, getting the feeling right. The energy tingling in his body, begging to be released, the way it made his muscles twitch and the way he had to release it. Kaminari reopened his eyes, focused as his body twitched slightly. He held himself back with sheer force of muscle, like a spring building pressure, his entire body shaking as stray sparks broke his skin. He'd been so proud of it. So many hours, practicing at home, at school, and even in class when he thought no one was looking. He thought no one would notice. But his master had noticed. The gray city had its first gust of wind as Kaminari's lightning leaked through his tears, coating his body and sword in an electric glow. I wanted Ronin to come back, not a corpse. There was a moment between Kaminari's voice echoing and his form suddenly moving, like it had that day at the summer camp. In a sudden flash, Kaminari bolted forward, his legs moving with inhumane speed. The small distance between them was nothing as the blonde bolt crashed forward, his cries of pain becoming his war cry. A golden sword flashed through the air, slamming into a fake's guard and launching both defense and defender back. The fake caught himself quickly, planting his body behind his sword to block again, but Kaminari had already moved again. His master had noticed. Kaminari moved like a speedster, moving at such high speeds he couldn't barely aim his body, accidentally charging right past his opponent. Snarling with rage, Kaminari turned, his shoes skidding against the cement before his momentum sent him crashing into a wall. His master had noticed his practice, his effort. Pushing past the pain, Kaminari pushed off the wall and sprinted straight at the fake, holding his sword in one hand before slamming it down like a baseball bat at his opponent's skull. The fake barely managed to deflect Kaminari's attack, pushing the boy to one side and off kilter. Again Kaminari rushed past him, their shoulders brushing as he careened past his opponent, locking his legs to stop himself. His master had noticed the effort Kaminari had put in to train his quirk, and he hadn't just praised him. He didn't give a few compliments, he didn't just play along, and he definitely didn't hold back. Kaminari could still remember his master's words, how he'd honestly told Kaminari how good he'd done, but how much he could still improve. Kaminari's leg lock technically succeeded in slowing the boy down, his legs giving out from under him and sending him to the ground hard. Kaminari flipped over his own tense legs, crashing and rolling along the ground painfully. He rolled over his own metal sword, a painful speed bump that caused him to drop the thing before flopping to a stop further down the road in a mess of tangled limbs. That day at UA's summer camp, its first day, was Kaminari's best day in years. Running down the mountain to their camp with his master, not ahead of him or behind him, but with him. They weren't always side by side, but they did it together, both putting in effort. It was that effort that Kaminari admired. It was that effort that Kaminari tapped into as he punched the road, his fingers aching as he pushed himself off the ground and into a sprint. He ran forward again, grabbing his sword as he moved and coming in again for another attack that completely missed as his opponent leapt out of the way. That run together, that day together, it wasn't just about effort. Taking a stupid picture together at the cliffs beforehand, talking together at the camp after, opening up to someone about his real feelings. It wasn't until this exact second that Kaminari realized that more than just a mentor, Ronin was his friend. But now, Ronin was gone. And so, with rage in his heart, Kaminari spun in the road, staring down the motherfucker who wore his friend's face, seeing a world of red. Iron filled his nose, his breathing was harsh, and his hearing was blocked by the drum of his own heartbeat as the lightning built up in his body exploded outward with a blinding flash. Kaminari's body spun as he corrected course, then disappeared as quick as it came. The fake didn't even get a full second to react as Kaminari appeared before him, golden sword descending like lightning from above. Swords sparked as they clashed, then clashed again. The world was a blur as Kaminari moved around the city, flying around his opponent like a hurricane. His charges were violent, crashing into his enemy with barely a shred of control. He twisted his body, forcing himself to turn back around after every missed charge, sliding along the road and crashing into the walls only to jump off whatever he hit and charge again. Just like Ronin would have. Two shapes moved in the hurricane, the crashing wind and the leaf caught inside. The growing gale tore at their clothes, pulling and pushing them around as steel met steel, so loud a young man couldn't hear his own whimpers as he finally mourned the friend he didn't know he lost. From the outside, Exam F watched on in awe. The cameras captured a bright blur of motion, quickly adjusting their feet to compensate for the insane speeds Kaminari was pulling off. I didn't know Kaminari could move like that. I didn't think Kaminari could even do that. The city was caught in a genuine windstorm as Kaminari and Ronin danced. The scene was hard to read, Kaminari almost flying between points as he charged at Ronin, only stopping to turn his body, and Ronin constantly jumping and diving out of the way, using his sword to only deflect rather than fight back. It was hard to say who was leading and who was following. I told you he could do it. Smintas and Nezu watched the feed, more reserved than the rest but still impressed. Nezu had come over as soon as he could, missing only 2 of the matches, but he was glad he could see the last one. Indeed you did, Smintas said with a nod. On the screen, Kaminari and Ronin were in constant motion, farther and harder than Smintas had ever imagined. If Eraser had the time to see this, he'd definitely agree too. This is the best I've ever seen Kaminari perform. Nezu looked up at the screen in admiration, amazed by the results of Ronin's training. On screen, Kaminari moved faster than Nezu thought possible, using his quirk to force his muscles to constrict faster than humanly possible. It would put an immense burden on the muscles and bones, but looking at how Kaminari tore through the city like a hurricane, the results spoke for themselves. And to think he could pull out such growth. Smintas shook his head in genuine respect for the vigilante named Ronin, reflecting on the times they'd run into each other. When they first fought in UA, when Kaminari jumped around the hall with such force he broke his legs. Do you think that's when this started? That was when Ronin saw this moment. Who can say? Principal Nezu shrugged, eyes locked on the screen in fascination. A student pushing themselves to their limits, going beyond what anyone thought was possible. A plus ultra moment, if you will. Truly though, a great moment to witness. Smintas and the other students nodded, thrilled and excited by what they heard and saw on the screen, a hero surpassing all expectations. A plus ultra moment, indeed. Kaminari didn't notice that their fight had moved around the city. Kaminari didn't notice how few of his hits landed. Kaminari didn't even notice how much his body hurt, every one of his injuries self-sustained. All Kaminari could see was the fake before him, still standing despite all his effort. And he hated it. Kaminari rushed forward time and time again, moving too fast to control his pacing and literally crashing into his opponent. Sometimes, it was with his blade, running in with a swing of his sword and slashing at his opponent. Sometimes, it was with his body, moving in so fast he couldn't swing in time and body checking his opponent. No matter what he did, though, he couldn't get the connection he was seeking. No matter how he came at that fake, the fraud would always move. With his shitty small steps, he did just to be out of Kaminari's way, deflecting his attacks and forcing Kaminari off balance. So Kaminari pushed himself harder, pushed himself to go even faster, to surpass the fake and finally take him down. It was exhausting. Moving at top speeds for more than 30 seconds, turning around, charging back in and attacking, it took a massive amount out of Kaminari. He was sweating buckets from the heat, panting for air, and feeling the gnawing sensation in the pits of his stomach as he burned through his energy in record time from going all out for so long. So, after charging for 26 seconds at full speed, for rushing in and attacking his opponent 34 times, Kaminari hit his wall. Kaminari stepped in for the 35th time, his legs pressing hard against the cement street to charge until, suddenly, they could hardly press against the street, his legs locking up as a burning sensation ran through them. Kaminari's red world flashed black as nausea and the streets rose up, one inside and one outside the faltering hero. Helplessly, the nausea and streets overwhelmed Kaminari, bringing him crashing down once again with a weight he couldn't push through. Worst of all, even as Kaminari fell, he could still see that man standing in the distance. That fucking fake, overlaid on the image of his friend. The fraud stood with his sword raised, legs tense as he ready to dodge again, but slowly going slack and rising to stand while looking down at him. Kaminari could feel his eyes looking through him, feel a shame that burned hotter than his aching body. No. Unceremoniously, Kaminari collapsed onto the street, having pulled and torn many of the muscles in his legs. His pants below the knees had been torn and burned off, showing skin and bloody knees. His shoes were melting, worn and warped from friction and the electric heat. No. Kaminari caught himself on bloody knees and elbows, the sparks in him dying out. He tried to push on, to power through, like Ronin always did. Shocks ran through his body as Kaminari electrocuted himself, but his body was too far gone to keep holding a charge. For the first time in his life, Kaminari was out of power. Kaminari didn't even know that his quirk could run out of power, but here he was. No, fuck. Kaminari moved off his elbows, collapsing as he tried to put his hands under him but could barely muster the strength to even look up. Still, he looked as hard as he could, his head feeling heavy. There was someone he had to see, right until the last moment. Moving toward him, Kaminari could faintly see someone coming out of the corner of his eye. His breathing was hard and heavy, his blood rushed in his head, and the sensation of pain coursing through his body was beginning to creep in. Slowly the world began to fade and as Kaminari let his eyes drop, fighting just to keep his head off the cement street. Cam. He failed. He had completely and utterly failed. The entire match, he hadn't landed a single strike. Cam. He couldn't uphold his master's name, he couldn't defeat a fake, and he couldn't even land a single hit. A complete and thorough failure. What would Ronin say if he saw him now? Kaminari, breathe. The blonde bulb was pulled back into reality by a small tap to his bruised brow. With what little energy he had, Kaminari glanced up, staring directly into the cold dead eyes of a Gatorade logo. Seriously, sometimes I wonder if you can even hear me. With a neck shaking from the effort to just stay up, Kaminari tilted his head to look around the Gatorade bottle. Squatting behind it was the man from earlier, looking down at him while shaking his own head. That speed might have been incredible, but that was totally the wrong way to use it. You've gotten faster all right, but that doesn't mean you always need to go full speed. Hey, don't stop. Deep breaths. His scars were definitely wrong, one of them was starting to smear, like paint. His code was a little different and his fighting style. There was no way in hell he could forget the differences in fighting style. Looks like quirk overuse. Not my area of expertise, but the first thing we need to do is get some energy back into you. Drink that Gatorade when you feel better, after that, we're definitely going to grab some yogurt for you. With the fight now over, though, Kaminari was able to look up at the man before him, head and eyes straining. Despite so much changing, though, the man crouching in front of him, drinking the Gatorade while mumbling his plans to himself was familiar. You've gotten a lot faster, and you held it on for so long. What was that, 30 seconds? The way he broke it down into smaller steps, stroking the small stubble on his chin, smiling even when he scolded his worst student. Trying to push both at the same time will only lead to burnout, great for training but dangerous in a fight. It was hard to see again, the hope and tears rising at once as Kaminari locked his arms to stay staring at the man before him. The waves of doubt that had washed over Kaminari ever since the summer camp, pulling back as if to ease his heart only to crash down harder each time. Ronin was missing. Ronin was found, dead. Ronin was alive, but was it really him under the mask? Master, is that you? Master. The man's concentrated face gave way to puzzlement, before breaking into a small smile as he leaned forward and gently tapped Kaminari on the head. I'm nobody's master, Master Kaminari. Now let's get you up, recovery girl's going to need to look over those legs. Arms smaller than his lifted Kaminari up, placing the boy over the man's shoulders, carrying him out with the strength he couldn't muster anymore. You, changed. Unable to think of any words in depth, Kaminari just said whatever popped into his head. Your old fighting style was cooler. We've both changed, for better and for worse. The man seemed as calm as ever, moving with slow deliberate steps to carry them out of the cement playground. This might surprise you, Kaminari, but nearly dying sucks. If it feels anything like this. Kaminari's body flopped like a wet noodle, barely able to even lift an arm. Even staying conscious at this point was getting difficult, the world swimming in and out of focus with every step they took. You will survive, Kaminari. You're strong. The man's words carried weight in Kaminari's mind, pushing down and settling the worries he'd been having. Your technique was impressive, probably the best you've ever shown. Now you just need to fine-tune it, control it instead of letting it control you. I'm told fights are easier to win you when you can aim. Control yourself, control your surroundings, and control your enemy. The basics too. Winning. A small laugh escaped Kaminari's lips as he closed his eyes, giving up his fight to move to try and stay awake a little longer. Looking back over the fight, what was the point in questioning who the man was, if he was just going to start throwing hands over it? He could feel it now in how the man nodded, giving a laugh of his own to Kaminari's comment. Exactly, you remembered. If you gain control over that technique, you should be a much harder opponent to topple. The first step is moderation. You should never go that fast if you can't handle it. Yeah. Kaminari's breathing relaxed as they made it to the main street, finally in sight of the rest of Exam F. The cheers of his classmates and jabs at his lackluster ending were all just white noise as they walked up the road. Kaminari, what you did was reckless. However, a familiar voice pierced the noise, a smile carried through the sound as they exited the city. You did good. Kaminari finally gave up consciousness, smiling as the tears fell, carried to sleep by the voice of a friend. Chapter and notes. Yet another chapter without Midoriya's Bob, and probably the last for a while. I'm unsure RN if we'll backtrack next chapter, seeing this scene from Midoriya's eyes, but I like the idea of leaving it as is and moving on. Again, I feel that I should have taken a psychology class, because I am no expert about this sort of thing. Kaminari has had a rollercoaster of emotions, and this was one way to deal with them. Very badly. Almost as badly as another young man, who took his own smaller issues and made them even larger, giving him a little perspective on what Kaminari was doing even if he's not as good expressing it. UA's goal is not to create functioning members of society, but superheroes. I think if you switch your mindset to include this, you might see why UA works the way it does, and what it prioritizes. High-stress environments are not something to be coped with, but sought after for their developmental potential. Power is everything. Even if it's not what was intended in canon, it's a conscious choice in my version, and is why UA can create some of the powerful yet fucked up heroes in the world like Endeavor or All Might, whose complexes have grown to become most of their personality by their respective first appearances. In canon, we get to see them grow past them after years of being propped up by their careers, and it's something I will be doing in the future. This isn't to excuse UA's behavior, but to explain it. Nezu might be an interesting character, but he has his weaknesses like his empathy, and I plan to lean into that going forward. I'm not sure if it will be fun, but I'll do my best to explore it. Thanks again to Ebony Bird of Doom for editing, you for reading, and Dr. Pepper for keeping me going. Adios amigos. Chapter 223, Going Forward. Chapter Summary. After a few surprising matches, Ronin stops being dragged around and starts dragging others. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The last of the training matches had come to a close. Midoriya carried Kaminari over his shoulders, the hero student coming in and out of consciousness with a soft smile as he babbled to himself. Ahead, the rest of Exam F and two supervisors from UA were cheering as they approached, offering open encouragement on a match well done. The match was not truly well done. It had been a disaster from start to finish, Kaminari getting so swept up in his anger that self-destructed. Any sane person would not have even called it a fight, with one person swinging so blindly with anger that they only managed to hurt themselves. Kaminari had pushed himself far too far, and for what? His joints must have taken a hard beating, pushing out so much force suddenly, and the way that he constantly crashed at it was a wonder he stayed standing as long as he did. The way he had fought, while flashy, was ridiculous at best. The time to scold would be later, though. Right now, Midoriya adjusted the limp noodle of a boy on his shoulders, shaking his head. There were a million things he could nitpick about that last fight, but his instincts told him something about that had been for the better. Definitely not for the best, but whether Kaminari had issues he needed to work out or just a chance to push himself further than he ever had before, Midoriya couldn't say. He was too inexperienced at stuff like this to put a finger on it, but with how it brought back the final moments he'd spent with Koda at the summer training camp. Seriously, what a mess. A mess from top to bottom, but a mess that left Midoriya smiling as he left the concrete streets. Was it Kaminari's openness or his effort that pulled through? Who could say, but whatever it was, it gave Midoriya a lot of room to work with for their training. After Kaminari had a nice long visit with UA's nurse. Nezu, where's the medical staff? Midoriya's greeting was a far cry from the cheering students, but somehow no one was surprised. Nezu had already called over medical robots at the midpoint of the fight, which was barely a few minutes ago. While they waited for the robots to arrive, Midoriya turned his attention to Exam F. Their faces were enthusiastic and excited, and all focused on Kaminari's display. Some like Mina were ecstatic about how cool he looked, while others like Kirishima were in awe of how far he pushed himself. Even the ever-grumpy Bakugo couldn't help but crack a small smile seeing how far his classmate could go. So, those faces were good. Meant they were paying attention, meant they were invested, and meant it was the perfect time to focus on the next part of the lesson. Everyone enjoyed seeing the fights. Midoriya's rhetorical question was met with cheers and shouts, the air filled with so many words he stood no chance of understanding half of it. Midoriya just smiled, nodding along and pretending that he could. Excellent, and that brings us to our first assignment. And with just one phrase, the air around these good but gullible students froze. You all fought hard and showed how much harder you can fight. To help you improve, we will have a peer review assignment. Revenant's eyes flicked from student to student, his smile a little sadistic as he took pleasure in turning their ideas against them. They wanted to fight him. Then he'd make sure they paid the price and gained something out of this. Each of you will write a report on 2 fights you saw today and you can't pick your own. Exam F had gotten their fun in fighting him and showing how much they'd grown since they last met, but it was clear they were doing that more to show off and less to improve. So, he turned their showboating on their head and turned it into part of the training regimen. You will write over your fellow students, not me, and we'll give a detailed report on the fight. What they did well, what they did not, and how they could improve. Nezu's eyes were sparkling so hard it was difficult to look past the fluffy football and focus on the stumbling students, who could barely wrap their heads around their new homework. And who said being the bad guy once in a while wasn't fun. Is this stuff for a grade? An excellent question was raised by Mina, whose brain looked like it might be smoking just thinking about how she was supposed to handle another assignment on top of her training and other classwork for the new semester. Midoriya gave her a small smile as he glanced over, eager to praise her for her good thinking. A great question. No, these reviews are not for a grade, Midoriya explained calmly. He had pissed off Eraserhead plenty of times in the past, so it wouldn't do to make more work for the guy. Besides, this was Midoriya's training regimen, and that meant logically it'd have to be Midoriya who graded the papers and fuck that. We will just be looking over the reviews to make sure you actually did them, then turn them into whoever you reviewed. Don't worry about offending whoever you're reviewing, though, you can leave your name blank. It was so little consolidation that it was, strictly speaking, none. Exam F was so small that everyone could figure out who wrote reviews over themselves just by reading it and thinking for a few seconds, a few stops short of some great mystery. It was not the goal of the exercise to just see the students squirm, though, but to get and give genuine feedback to each other. That was why, if someone has no reviews written about them, I will write one for them. Are there any questions? There was a lot of whispering among the students as they talked amongst themselves, but only Bakugo was willing to go against the grain and ask the obvious questions. Gramps, when the hell is this shit due? I've got training to do, and don't have time to waste. The reviews will be due before the end of the week, Midoriya outlined. That should give everyone plenty of time to write something up, even if they probably ended up doing it at the very last minute. To keep these matches fresh in your mind, we'll see if Principal Nezu here can cook up some footage for each of the fights for you to look at. With Nezu playing right into his hand, all too eager to put this new idea into motion, Midoriya was content with this opening exercise. Seeing the students' progress, then forcing the students to reflect on their own progress and each other's yeah, it was all coming together. Barely perturbed as the medical robots finally arrived, Midoriya took the unconscious Kaminari off his shoulders and onto a stretcher to be carried off. It seemed Kaminari's training would begin tomorrow. He was too tired and injured to do anything today. Kaminari would need to have energy before Recovery Girl could use her quirk to heal him, so at best he'd be joining them again tomorrow. With the fight ended, Kaminari taken care of, and the assignments laid out, Midoriya moved straight on to the next bit of business. It appears Monoma still won't be joining us. No matter. It's time to get back into training. Midoriya clapped his hands as he faced the students, giving himself a quick mental summary. We organized you to train with me in what order back at the summer training camp, but we don't have all day to train this time, barely half a day. Tomorrow we might have more time, but that's a mess to deal with then. For now, let's focus on today. You students have your provisional license exams coming up. Midoriya started his pre-written speech on the provisional license exams, a very important event in any aspiring hero's career, but his sweeping gaze and the looks his students gave back to him told him they might have already heard a few speeches about this. Best to just skip the important stuff and cut the fluff, like how important this all was in that jazz. The provisional license exam changes every year, Revenant led, focusing on details instead of subtext. He straightened out, resting a hand on his sword as he monologued on the basics of the exams. Now, they have reused some exams from year to year, so it's never a bad idea to check the previous years, but the main focus of the exam is the main focus of heroism. As long as you focus on that, you should be fine. Revenant paced slightly, looking each of the students over. To prepare you for this, your principal wants each of you to develop your own ultimate moves. I want you to focus on the basics. What you do, though, is up to you. I am here as a resource. Revenant locked eyes with each of the students as he passed them by, once again too inexperienced to read their thoughts as they turned over his words. I am here not to teach you how to create an ultimate move, nor how to do the basics of heroism. I am here to help you. Anyone who wants my help gets it. Revenant stepped back, turning to look at all of Exam F as he finished his little speech. We have until 3:15. It's almost 1. That's about 2 hours across 5 students. Let's say 20-minute practices with 5-minute breaks between for me if everyone wants another chance to beat me up. Who wants a time slot? Although Revenant still didn't quite get people, he wasn't surprised when all of Exam F raised their hands. He smiled, adjusting his bandana as he dropped his bag back on the lip of the cement city, clapping his hands and nodding to himself. Excellent. Same order as the matches, then. To the rest of you, good luck and safe training. Bakugo, on the floor. Kirishima, you're next. Am I understood? Yes, sir. The echo of the student's confirmation died away quickly, echoing and fading out into the background as Bakugo and Ronin stood in a crossway, roads leading up in almost every direction as they talked. When asked if he'd rather train his basics or his ultimate move, Bakugo was quick to snap back with, why only one, sensei? With a response more like a comeback in tone like he was asking for a fight, Bakugo divided his 20 minutes into getting more practice with his newest ultimate move and his basics, in that order. The first business was getting more practice with the ultimate move, AP shot. It took Bakugo a few seconds to get in position to use AP shot, and when even a second could define a battle, that was far too much. They started having the blonde bomber go in and out of the firing position several times, shaving off a second or two as Bakugo got a better feel for it. The real work, though, was in their conversation. Not all attacks can be used at all times. Ronin spread his shoulders wide, tapping the twin pistols he kept under each arm to emphasize his point. Not only does it take a second to draw these, I also need to aim and fire them, and while I could use them at close range, it's a waste. You should find out when the best time to use the AP shot is instead of trying to cram it in everywhere. Bakugo took to the concepts well enough, even if nothing short of a miracle could keep his tongue in check. In just their training alone, Bakugo identified the best time to use the AP shot was either as an opener or a gap attack move to be used when his opponent couldn't react, whether because they didn't know he was there, or because they'd been put into a compromised position. Its best use, however, was for breaking through hard surfaces like the concrete walls in the fake buildings. That was something that'd be very useful for the provisional exam if Midoriya remembered the past exams correctly. Past the AP shot, Bakugo was interested to hear what basic training entailed. The pair got into talking over the provisional exam, the general beats it covered, and the basics it covered. Surprisingly, Bakugo wasn't overly familiar with it. Sure, combat was a large part of it, put on a dominating display, but there were other small parts too. The hero's provisional license exam was an open invitation that happened every year, and if it had just been half a year earlier, Ronin would have encouraged the aspiring student to swing by and see what it was like for himself. It was too late for that now, though. For now, Ronin's memories of the last event would have to do, as the event had a strict no-recording stance. He hadn't been in person, but as it was an event centered around a bunch of students, it would always be leaked sooner or later. Kirishima. Kirishima would have loved to work on his ultimate move, if he could think of one. Kirishima was a far cry from his apparent friend Bakugo. While both came off as confident and self-assured, one was the real deal and the other was, ironically, flimsy. While one had all the answers to what he wanted to do and how to do it, the other barely knew what he wanted in the first place. My quirk isn't flashy, like Bakugo's, Kirishima said as he hardened an arm to make his point. And I can't come up with all the cool stuff he does either. Flying around, shooting bad guys, my quirk just makes me tougher. That doesn't even look manly. It seemed Ronin might have wished on a monkey's paw somewhere he didn't realize. He had just been thinking about how hard it was to deal with the students emotionally, trying to read their thoughts and cook up stories to hide the truth. Now here he was, getting great practice at something he was painfully unready for. Whatever the hell this was. Doesn't look manly. Ronin wasn't sure if this was something teachers normally had to deal with, but for him some punk who had never even had a quirk it felt stupid as hell. Your quirk didn't look manly. Cool. Who cared? At least your quirk was something useful. In middle school, Midoriya knew a kid whose quirk was extending fingers. Now that was a lame quirk. But could you just tell some guy who opened up to you that his problems were petty and stupid? Yes. Well, but you shouldn't. I see. Ronin stalled with the most generic answer he could think of while he organized his thoughts. The two of them were barely in the cement city, instead talking on the very lip of it. Ronin leaned against a building, rubbing his head as his mind raced to come up with an answer worth a shit. Quote. What do you think makes a quirk good? A good quirk. Kirishima rubbed his head at the question, turning the words around as he turned it over in his mind. It was a nice bland start to figure out where to go from here. Kirishima seemed to have a low opinion of his own quirk. Otherwise, why would he be complaining about it? On the other hand, Ronin thought it was amazing. He'd seen firsthand what a defensive quirk could do in the hands of someone capable, and he could still remember the first time Mal beat the ever-loving shit out of him with it. The main man was so good with his defensive quirk he didn't even need super strength to wreck shop. But then again, it was precisely because of the gap between Kirishima and Ronin's experiences that created this problem. A good quirk is useful. Kirishima stuck to the basics, affirmed by Ronin's small nod to continue. Like Bakugo's explosion or Todoroki's ice. Big attacks that can sweep up the bad guys in one hit, that's what makes a good quirk. That can be a good quirk. Ronin was still trying to get in Kirishima's head, but the answer was pretty readable at least. Kirishima's definition of a good quirk sounded more like what a 5-year-old kid who just watched an action movie would have thought was good. But there are good quirks that aren't so flashy. After all, what can people like Bakugo and Todoroki do against Eraserhead? Kirishima nodded, understanding Ronin's words, but the vigilante wasn't sure he was getting it. Yeah, Eraserhead sensei's amazing. Did you know he once took on like 20 villains at once? It was so cool to watch. And then, when the league showed up, There are many kinds of good quirks, but I think your first answer might be the best. Ronin pulled Kirishima back into focus, talking more about quirks and less about the users. A useful quirk is a good quirk. And isn't your quirk useful? Being able to take a beating in heroism is one of the most important traits. Kirishima nodded, but he definitely wasn't getting it. Ronin couldn't put his finger on it, but this was much harder than explaining how becoming harder was a useful superpower. It can be useful, but there are other way cooler quirks. Kirishima kept doing that, he kept focusing on other people for some reason. It spun Midoriya and Revenant's head in circles as he sold himself short again, going back to talking about some of the rest of Exam F. Like, yeah, I can take a beating, but you saw what Kaminari pulled out today. I can't do anything wild like that. Hell, I don't even know how he did that. Or how Mina does her cool slip and slide thing, or Bakugo can fly. So, Kirishima's rocky grounding with his quirk meant it was easy to tip him back, surprising him with just a word. Kirishima looked a little confused as he looked at the cool figure of Ronin, leaning back against the building casually. Thinking back over, Revenant had a bad idea to try out. Pushing off the wall, he gestured for Kirishima to follow him, walking through the city while making small talk. Yes, Kaminari's fast, Mina learned to use her quirk to slide around, and Bakugo can fly around on his explosions. He barely glanced back at the Kirishima as he looked over his shoulder. So what? Revenant was all too eager to study others, to try and take moves from them, and to improve himself. It seemed, though, that Kirishima was studying others and only using it to dig himself deeper into a ditch. To bring this issue to a front, Revenant stopped in front of a random building, tapping the wall. Seemed pretty thick, but you've got your strong points, too. For one, you're strong. Think you can break this wall? Kirishima meekly followed behind, a far cry from the usual bravado the Red Riot usually showed. He tapped the wall, barely thinking it over. I can, but how's this? Break this wall, Red Riot. Revenant stepped clear, giving room for Kirishima to work his magic while pulling out his timer, and adjusting a few settings to keep the 20-minute training session in the background. I need you to trust me, and break this wall. Kirishima looked from the wall to his teacher, clearly confused, but remembered that he signed up for this. Placing a hand on the wall, Kirishima's gaze hardened followed immediately by his arms, the young man planting his feet before slamming a heavy hand into the wall. Immediately, the wall cracked, leaning in slightly. Then came the next hand, and the next crack appeared, and the next after that. In just a few punches, Kirishima punched clean through the wall, sending bits of concrete crumbling into the building. The inside of the building was nothing impressive, just a blank box in a blank city cooked up by Smintos and a few seconds save for another large hole on the opposite wall, mirroring Kirishima's down to the rubble that was knocked inside. That was done by Bakugo during his training. Revenant brought up the comparison himself, really playing into the bad idea. If this didn't work, it would probably just make Kirishima's issues worse, showing him that not only could Bakugo do a million other things, but he could also do one of Kirishima's signature things. Recently he developed a new attack, focusing his explosion into a small point to shoot for further distances or destroy objects like this. Luckily, Kirishima was first wowed by Bakugo's work instead of the comparison, moving into the building to check out the other broken bit of wall on his own. Bakugo did this, today. Yes, very similarly to how you do. Revenant was more intrigued by Kirishima's work than Bakugo's. He had seen that Bakugo could do this at least a dozen times today, but he had only heard through reports that Kirishima could break concrete walls with his bare hands. It really was amazing, but the difference is it took him months to learn how to do that. 2 seconds to come to a stop, 1 second to find a good point to shoot on the wall, and 2 more to get into position. Then he actually needs to shoot, firing a loud blast hard enough to blow through the concrete, generally taking him up to about 7 or 8 seconds in total. Revenant trailed off as he turned around the timer. He had started a new timer on Kirishima's first punch and ended it when the wall collapsed. As opposed to your 4-second time. Not very good for a flashy quirk, Stepping through Kirishima's hole, Revenant took in the room as he spoke. Just because your quirk isn't flashy doesn't mean it isn't good. Just because a quirk is flashy doesn't mean it is good. Your quirk is powerful and can do many things better than others. Don't look down on it. While Ronin was feeling this out with every step, Kirishima was still looking at the hole in amazement. To check where they were, Ronin pulled back to the main question. Just because your quirk is simple does not make it boring or weak. It's as boring and weak as you let it be. Ronin picked up a piece of rubble, tossing it in his hand and admiring its considerable heft. Even with all his gear, there was no way he could do something like punch through a concrete wall. Honestly, he was a little jealous. This definitely would have been a handy power when he was trying to break into the warehouses and having to jump through windows. So, what do you want to do? The ball was back in Kirishima's court. Hopefully, they could focus on more than just whether or not Kirishima's quirk was lame. Hopefully, they could focus more on developing it to possibly create that ultimate move Kirishima couldn't think of at the start of their training, but only Kirishima could decide that. Next. The rest of the students came and went quickly. Almost all of them were training their ultimate moves in the other building, so they were eager to try them out with Ronin and get his feedback. Was it because he wasn't a normal member of UA's staff? A trust they placed in him for some reason? Who could say? By the end of the day, Nezu was still standing tall by the gym's exit with a pleasant smile, practically bouncing with energy as Mina and Ronin left the city a safety hazard. Between Bakugo's explosions, Kirishima's fists, Zero's tape and Mina's acid transforming the cityscape into a small catastrophe, it was for the best that Exam F wrapped up before a building collapsed. Your ability to merge your dancing and movement makes you a formidable opponent, Ronin concluded, focus more on the lesson at hand than the buildings at his back. If you can make an ultimate move to play off that, I'm sure it will take you far. Thanks. Mina flashed him a smile, giving him a playful shoulder bump as she slid ahead of him. Most of their training had been spent on ultimate moves, with Mina trying out a large variety of ways to release her acid. Spraying like a hose, throwing it like a ball, from her feet to slide, from her whole body to make her look like a melted snowman, any one of them could pay out into a useful move. Think I got a few more surprises for you ahead. I look forward to it. Ronin barely batted an eye at Nezu, giving him no more attention than necessary. Only once Mina was rambling to herself as they left the building did he address their short shadow quietly following behind them. Anything we're doing at the end of the day? One more speech, or just a wave goodbye? I think the students have heard enough speeches today, Nezu said as moved beside Ronin, walking with hands stuck back. Your training seems to have gone well, though. Seems so. Returning to the main gym, Ronin could see most of 1A with one glance. By the end of the day, the energy had died down, though the enthusiasm was still riding high. The students had moved from the cement pillars they'd been training onto the sides, talking with one another and gaining new ideas. Among them Ronin picked out the spiky red hair of Kirishima, their time together still fresh in his mind. He seemed energetic, but how much of that was bravado? How much that was the young hero putting into improving himself instead of just comparing himself to the rest? At least, I hope so. There's still one student who'd like to see you, though. Now it was someone else's turn to refocus Ronin, Nezu pulling him into the present with a chipper smile. I just heard from recovery girl that Kaminari's awake. Good. Ronin shared in Nezu's smile. He was glad that Kaminari was awake, and if Nezu wasn't sharing any bad news, the young hero was probably fine, even after such a horrible fight. Something about it rubbed Ronin the wrong way. Taking one last look over 1A, Ronin exchanged a few parting smiles before turning and leaving the gymnasium for Yua proper. Ronin and Nezu took the Yua golf cart back to the main building. They drove along, sitting side by side in the back while their robot chauffeur took the wheel. As they drove, Nezu talked over the day's events as if reading off an itinerary, like the schoolworker he was. With your help, we've graded several projects for the support course in just an hour, given 2B some good one-on-one learning, then honed it in for Exam F, chipping off the work of several teachers into one to save time and produce better results. You really are teacher material. If this is what teaching requires, I'm not sure anyone's good enough to be teacher material. Ronin shook his head, the notebooks he barely used bouncing in his duffel bag as they zoomed along. Sure, he got a lot of work done, but it was hardly what he had planned. Most of the time I thought I'd spend teaching them was used instead to talk them through their issues. Instead of being a teacher, I felt more like a therapist. I didn't even get through a fraction of the training regimens I planned. Well, today was a shorter day, Nezu playfully reminded him, leaning in to give him a pat on the thigh like he was consoling him. And some days, you need to be both. These are growing students, the youth of today and the future of tomorrow. They need a lot more guidance than just how to fight well. Ronin shook his head, annoyed less at Nezu's words but at how true they were. Not everyone was like him, able to just push through the worries to focus on the fight. With his mindset, Kirishima's problems would have never even occurred to him. I'll have to be better tomorrow, Ronin said as he looked back at the gym growing small in the distance, still visible even as UA's main campus grew larger behind him. We wasted time with those fights, but tomorrow we'll start earlier. I can extend the training of each student to 30 minutes, that should be enough to get some results. Tomorrow. Nezu looked up at him incredulously, then leaned in further, perched on Ronin's leg with sparkling eyes. You're coming back tomorrow? Just for training, Revenant growled, glaring at Nezu, but his words were less effective than a spray bottle on a misbehaving cat. I plan to come back every day this week. Nezu's energy was palpable, already scheming up new things to do with his temp worker. Ronin didn't even bother trying to discourage him, the scheming gave him a quiet moment. For the first time since he'd gotten here, he could think back over the day and put it all in order. New mask, training 2B, training 1A. Just like Nezu said. Taking the domino mask off his belt, Ronin looked it over before looking through it. Judging the support course's masks hadn't been a part of his plan, but trying to shape the industry to encourage functional designs was a good thing even if he didn't like doing it. What he did like was the 2 masks he had gotten, a practical steal in comparison to the price he paid. Training 2B and 1A was mostly practice for him. Training using his new mask, practicing against people with powerful quirks, and a safe environment to try out a few things. Almost all of 2B and 1A weren't serious threats to him, with his bodysuit in working order. The worst he'd get was a bruise, or maybe a sore ankle if he landed wrong like Kaminari had. Just thinking of Kaminari's fight made him shake his head. While he had expected a few issues during training, Kaminari's fight was far worse than anything he'd expected. His favorite student charging in almost literally blind, ignoring his teacher's words to the very end. While the fight had ended safely, the fight itself was far from safe. Ronin wasn't sure he could have taken Kaminari down without giving him a massive injury. That might have been the most power I've ever seen out of him, Ronin mused, his thoughts becoming verbal on accident as he tried to wrap his head around it. Now with this chance to reflect, he could see that Kaminari's fight didn't sit right with him. Yes, the Kaminari fight was incredible. Ronin's reflection was interrupted, or perhaps pushed forward by Nezu's interruption. Nezu was back in the moment, working on a smartphone like it was a tablet as he spoke. Usually, when Kaminari releases that much energy, he's locked in one place. This is the first time I've seen him release his energy while moving in the speeds he achieved. The speeds he achieved were unsafe. Ronin cut back in, his voice stern and brown-head. He had no control over himself, and he wasn't listening to me, either. Oh, Nezu glanced up at Ronin, a single eyebrow raised as he spoke with doubt in his voice. Are you saying you didn't intend to push these results out of Kaminari? Those results weren't pulled, they were forced and it showed. If that fight hadn't ended so quickly, he could have caused permanent damage to himself. In fact, Kaminari's fight had ended early. Instead of the few minutes Kaminari and Ronin were supposed to fight, they barely squeezed in one before Kaminari pushed himself too far. I have no idea what he was thinking, going so far. For what? Nezu stared up at him, his emotions hidden behind a furry and very punchable face, a cute facade that served mostly to piss Ronin off. I wonder where he gets it from. I'll ask him later, Ronin said, pushing Nezu's comment aside without a second thought. Yes, that must be his problem with the fight. Kaminari had been pushing himself too hard. It was a strange problem, the opposite of his usual problem with heroes, but he was sure he could deal with it once he understood what caused it. UA's medical facilities were in full swing, even after class. Many a student dropped by, if just for a few minutes, but this time of year it was hardly a surprise. All of the first and second year Hero Course students had started their hardcore training for their provisional license exams, and many were starting to push their own limits to varying effects. The students who were here suffering from quirk overuse were just the first wave, part of a trend that would grow with each passing day. There were twice as many as usual, with first years joining the second years for their exams, but that was just from the Hero Course. While it would start with just the Hero Course, over the next few days there'd be more. Students who'd been spending a little too much time studying and not enough taking care of themselves, dropping by the nurse's office for a quick remedy to their problems. After doing this for years, Recovery Girl got used to it, but that didn't mean she didn't get exasperated by it every time it happened. Already, she was deep into a lecture to several Hero Course students about this little thing called pacing. And on the first day, no less, Recovery Girl shook her head in dismay at the children before her, slightly frustrated by them and far more by their teachers. Those exams might be important, but only if you're fit enough to attend them. You have to look after yourselves too, you know. Yes ma'am, a chorus of responses came from several very sleepy students. It seemed she was going to have her annual meeting with the teachers again. Shaking her head, Recovery Girl opened a bottle of high-energy gummies and passed them out to the students. Alright, you're going to need to wait 30 minutes for those to kick in, and then you're free to go, except for you, Kaminari. Shaking her cane in a grandmother's affectionate fury, Recovery Girl directed her attention to the worst offender of the lot, Denki Kaminari from Class 1A. The blonde boy had enough wrapping on his knees and elbows to look like a pro skateboarder. Bloody knuckles, elbows, knees, and even toes. Strained and sprained ankles and knees. Friction burns on his legs and feet. Electrical burns on most of his body. Regular burns from melting his shoes all top with one of the worst cases of quirk overuse today. This was the kind of case Recovery Girl expected on the third or fourth day, not halfway through the first. I don't know what you think you were thinking, but you'd better think again, young man. Recovery Girl walked over to his bedside, shaking her head as she checked his eyes with a small flashlight. With his basket case of issues, most of the usual ways she could check his energy levels were out, so she focused on what she could and improvised around the issues, checking his heartbeat to make sure it was staying steady. With the combination of all his injuries and quirk overuse, Kaminari couldn't be healed immediately. Recovery Girl's quirk required the person she was healing to have energy, and it had taken 2 hours just to reach the point where Kaminari had enough energy to do anything, which mostly consisted of playing with the IV drip in his arm and messing with the tubing whenever he thought nobody was looking. You might be in here for an overnight stay, I'm afraid. Recovery Girl checked over Kaminari's papers, picking up a clipboard off the foot of the medical bed and flipping through all the issues she diagnosed and seeing if she could check off any of them yet, but to no avail. It was going to be a long night, and that was before the walking disaster maker himself, Principal Nezu, strolled into her side of UA, escorted by one very suspicious-looking figure she recognized all too well. Recovery Girl, it looks like you've got everything in working. Save your flapper, fuzzball. Recovery Girl cut him off with one impressive bonk to the head, ending the principal's speech before it could get going. We do the same song and dance every year, and you still can't come up with a good method to keep people out of my office. Your combat exercises are one thing, but this, what happened to being the smartest animal alive, huh? While Recovery Girl shook Nezu like a stuffed animal, she took a second to glance up at that suspicious stranger behind Nezu. And you, come back again, Seems so. Ronin gave just a small nod, keeping it brief after seeing the peacekeeper using a few hard knocks to keep that peace. Not for myself, at least. Not this time, at least. Recovery Girl huffed as she gestured to a sheepish Kaminari, waving hello quietly in the background. And I assume this happened under your watch? Yes ma'am. With a sharp but brief bow, Ronin redirected Recovery Girl's fury back his way, pretty sure this part of the problem was his fault. Won't happen again. If I haven't heard it 1,000 times. Recovery Girl seemed more than a little tired. Using her quirk might use her target's energy to heal them, but using the quirk always has a small cost for the user. Besides, she was more fed up than angry, especially at the sudden high influx of students coming in. She was quick to temper herself, shaking her head. I know you have high expectations, but you need to learn pacing. Not everyone is as good as you. Thinking over it, Ronin just stayed out instead of trying to correct Recovery Girl on what actually happened. But why did everyone think that this was his intended outcome? He didn't even think they should spar in the first place, and now everybody thought he planned it from the start. What did they take him for? Actually, that was my fault, Recovery Girl. I'm the one who got really into our fight. Kaminari piped up, trying to defend Ronin, but he was brushed aside by the adults in the conversation, both Nezu and Recovery Girl. Technically, as your supervisor, it was Ronin's fault the moment he failed to supervise you. Nezu countered with a definitive definition, earning him a sudden pinch ear from Recovery Girl as she turned her ire back up. And I suppose that means you failed for every student who keeps winding up in here year after year. Recovery Girl was quick to turn it around on Nezu, but her bark was mostly gone. She let go of his ear, shaking her head as she swatted Nezu and Ronin out of the doorway. Several students passed by, leaving the medical area to probably go home for the day while the four stayed to talk about Kaminari's situation. Recovery Girl kept it short and simple, showing a laundry list of injuries Kaminari suffered. The bloodied and bruised joints from Kaminari's bad landings, the strained and sprained joints from all the force Kaminari put his body through, the electric burns and lethargicness from his quirk overuse. Kaminari had so many problems that Recovery Girl had to staple 2 papers together just to fit them all. And to think Kaminari did all this to himself in just 30 seconds. How long will his recovery time be? Revenant looked at the list, shaking his head with a deep frown. If it was him, resting up on his own, this sort of thing would take well over a month to fully recover. Possibly 3. Will he be able to take the provisional license exam this semester? In one sentence, Revenant introduced a horror to Kaminari's world that he hadn't thought of. Being a whole half a year behind his classmates, just because he got caught up in his own head and pushed himself too far. For Recovery Girl and Nezu, though, they just gave a small nod to the sentiment, seeing it as the perfect threat and not the genuine question it was meant to be. Nothing better for chastising an overly eager student than by showing them how their efforts had backfired. Something as small as this, to UA students, was hardly anything. But Kaminari needed to learn the lesson, so. It's hard to say, Recovery Girl muttered, tapping the clipboard in the list on it. The quirk overuse is the first problem. Can't have him using his quirk for a full 24 hours. We have to let the body rest and recover, and there's no shaking that. Past that, though. Kaminari was past shook now. He'd barely done any training today, while students like Bakugo and Mina had been working out entire ultimate moves. On top of that, he wouldn't even be able to start training for another 24 hours. It didn't occur to the aspiring hero that his 24 hours started a few hours ago and that he would be able to train again tomorrow. Recovery Girl and Nezu didn't even think of that, still focused on his other problems. He does have a lot of injuries, but none of them will create any lasting issues. The important thing is bracing his joints so he doesn't hurt them more while he sleeps tonight, Recovery Girl summarized, giving a basic outline of her plan. Kaminari would be staying here for the night, and staying on the IV drip to regain his energy ASAP. To help him along, Recovery Girl would be using her quirk on him once as soon as she thought he was ready, a second time before lights out, and one last time before school tomorrow when they'd reevaluate his condition. Ronin was a little interested to learn how Yue handled this sort of thing, nodding along as they went over each step. By now, the medical wing was fairly empty, with only the occasional student passing through. Seeing the scene was fairly dead, Ronin pushed forward for a little one-on-one time. Do you mind if I have a moment with Kaminari? I don't want to intrude, but... Of course, dear. Despite her earlier chastisement, Recovery Girl gave Ronin a small smile, always eager to see a teacher and a student having a good relationship in Yue no less. I have a few other patients I need to tend to, so if you need anything, just holler, alright. Alrighty Recovery Girl, keep up the great WRK. Nezu gave Recovery Girl a cheery smile before being pulled along by his tie, dragged away from the scene by the small doctor. While you're here, Principal, I had a few things I needed to talk to you about. Their conversation got quieter as they moved away, Recovery Girl giving Kaminari and Ronin one last knowing smile as she offered them one last help and dragged the principal away. The UA staff no longer listening, the UA body no longer present, and the robots running around not giving a rat's ass gave Kaminari and Ronin a moment of silence together, the first real moment they'd had since the training camp. Not watched by the entirety of exam F through a monitor, not being studied by an overeager principal, just a few seconds mentor to mentee. Chapter end notes. You thought this took forever, and you were right. Sorry about the wait, but I in order planned a vacation, got sick, took that vacation, got back, dealt with the work pickup from vacation, got better, worked on D&D stuff, helped someone set up their new house, then got sick again. I'm back on the upswing and I'm back on the writing, so here we are and let's do this before I get sick a third time. Stuff. I want to do stuff with Kirishima, but it's not really Ronin's expertise or mine. Kirishima is a cool character who I like, and have reason to use as he is part of exam F, but not good reason to change much. He's not the character we're focusing on, but I still will try doing some stuff and see how that turns out. Hopefully my character juggling skills have improved since last time. That's really the only thing I have to explain this time, I think. Kaminari's gonna be at the start of the next chapter, and once we work on that, we're gonna keep moving on. I wanted to pick up the pace, so I can't linger on things for too long and focus an entire chapter in one scene. My plan to keep the pace going is to keep switching the scenes during one chapter so one chapter isn't just one place, and only time will tell how that works out. That's all I got. My editor, Ebony Bird of Doom hasn't heard of this chapter yet, they're the one I was helping with the house stuff so they're gonna be busy for a long time. Still, thanks to them for the work they've done so far, and thanks to you for reading so far. Adios amigos. Chapter 224, Shame. Chapter summary. A confrontation with one's problems, and the challenges you can't beat. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The air was a little charged, after Recovery Girl's rough synopsis of Kaminari's injuries and recovery time. Even as Recovery Girl left, dragging Principal Nezu behind her by his tie, there was still a tense mood hanging between Kaminari and Ronin. Kaminari was still in his recovery bed, lying back down with wide eyes as he thought over the day and the events that got him here. His brow was knit, eyes scrunched, and it looked like he was beating himself over every step that got him stuck in this bed. But he probably should have been. Ronin looked around the room, taking one of the waiting chairs and dragging it to Kaminari's bedside. He didn't plan to stay long, but it felt right to put them on a closer level, so he sat down and tried to play this by ear. How are you feeling, Kaminari? Kaminari's head flopped towards Ronin. Aside from being stressed and worn down, the hero student looked tired. He was still getting energy just to do anything, and he had passed out from exhaustion a few hours ago. It'd be a long time until he had energy again, and so, he was too tired to put up a facade. The hero student just gave Ronin a small cheeky smile, trying to come up with a better answer before just settling on honesty. I feel like shit, sir. Don't bother with formalities, Ronin said with a wave of his hand. He twiddled his fingers, a nervous habit he had for years, before reaching into his bag and setting a Gatorade on the desk next to Kaminari while beginning his rambling. It's probably for the best that you feel like shit, that is. You see, if you do significant enough damage, you can feel nothing at all, either you're in shock or you damage your nervous system. Both can have permanent effects that stick with you. Ronin glanced down at Kaminari, rubbing his chin. Sorry, I tend to ramble a lot. Sorry I got here. Kaminari had a short laugh, doing something like a shrug before going limp again, settling for staring off vaguely where Ronin's head was. You ever done that? Damage your nerves and stuff from going too hard? I wouldn't say it was from going too hard. Midoriya rubbed his neck subconsciously. Ever since he was about 6, he'd been really good at getting beat up. It took the doctor 2 more years to figure it out, but somewhere along the line from all the bullying, his sense of pain had started to dull. It wasn't anything amazing, like a superpower, but after being beaten and burned so many times, his body and mind had learned to tune out pain and just keep going. It was one of the reasons he was so good at vigilantism, and in turn, his vigilantism had made him even better at taking a beating. But I've had something similar happen to me. A lot of professional heroes who've been in the business for a long time have. Man, that shit's crazy. Kaminari's head wobbled, he was probably trying to shake his head. It is. Ronin agreed quickly, nodding for the both of them, then put his hand on the bedside to refocus himself on the real current issue. But while you should remember this, you'll recover this time. This time. Do not try to repeat this, understood? Aye, sir. One of Kaminari's gasps came up in an attempt to salute, but the bandaging wouldn't let Kaminari raise his arm that far. Ronin reached out, gently pushing the arm back down and continuing. Kaminari, why'd you do it? It sounded a little weird, but Ronin wasn't sure how else to phrase it. He leaned forward, trying to match eyes with Kaminari while forgetting his own banana. Why'd you push yourself so hard? Ronin didn't remind Kaminari of what could have happened to him, or what did. Eraserhead would probably chew him out for it later, and Recovery Girl had definitely drilled it into his head. But Ronin didn't care about the consequences so much as the cause. Ronin trusted that Kaminari could figure out that what he'd done was bad, so they could move past scolding into improving. Kaminari didn't meet Ronin's eyes. Partially because he couldn't, with Ronin's bandana covering them, but mostly because he looked the other way as he spoke. I wanted to show off what I'd learned. I'd seen what everyone else was doing, and I wanted to show you what I could do. I guess I went too hard, huh? Kaminari trailed off as he finally looked at the stone-still face of Ronin. It was hard to say if Ronin believed him or not, but there was something worse there than belief. Trust. Kaminari winced, turning away one last time before lamely looking at the ground. And, I was angry. Angry at what? Ronin leaned further forward, gently prodding Kaminari to keep going. The young boy was still looking at the ground as he mumbled his response. I was mad. At you. Kaminari quickly sat up, pushing through the pain with a worried expression. No, I mean, I was really happy to see you. Like, seriously man, I was. But, when I saw you again, you had changed so much, I couldn't recognize you. Your style, your fit, your moves. Kaminari limply gave into gravity, falling softly back on his bed. I mean, when I first saw you, I thought something was off. You didn't change, I guess, but you weren't the same as I remembered. You weren't as fast, you weren't as strong, you weren't as cool. Sorry, this sounds dumb as hell. Kaminari, it's fine. Ronin shrugged slightly, trying to find some words to work through this. He didn't know any. Maybe this stuff was the kind. That's why I have to make sure you're better than me. Kaminari nodded as he looked at the arm in more detail, his eyes still red as he checked out the injuries visible on his hand alone. Yeah, no wonder you wear armor. Geez, man, you're more scar than skin. How many fuck-ups did you have to get all those? Flexing his hand, the mystery drew back his arm with a small laugh at himself. More than I should have. Frankly, I shouldn't even have a hand anymore. But I am one lucky bastard. Maybe Kaminari didn't get it, but it was better than nothing. Maybe one day he would, and finally realize just how bad the Ronin really was. But until that day, Midoriya would work. Midoriya wasn't sure what to say to Kaminari, but he told the young hero to rest. It was obvious Kaminari couldn't do anything but rest with his injuries, but Midoriya still felt the need to say something. He could tell it wasn't right. Midoriya could tell there was more he should say, some things deeper that he should have said but he couldn't recognize what, in the swirling mess of his shame and disappointment whirling around in his heart. For now, it'd have to do. Kaminari saw him off with a smile and a sort of wave, doing his best with his arms all bandaged up, but they could both tell everything wasn't all right as they parted ways. Exchanging those awkward waves, Midoriya left the medical wing of UA, shutting the door behind him and leaning against the wall, taking a much-needed second to try working through his thoughts. 1 second turned to 2, then a dozen of dozens as Midoriya slumped against that wall, rubbing his head in frustration. He was there long enough that Nezu caught him outside, the furry fucker having finally managed to escape recovery girl himself. Oh, you're still here. That fluffy football said to him with his usual smile as he looked up at Midoriya, clearly unable to read the room. It looked like Midoriya couldn't turn to him for answers, but that was no surprise. Couldn't get enough, could you? Or, were you waiting for me? Nezu's coy smile was as facetious as his words, but as Midoriya started to rebuke the football or maybe just spun him, one of the tangled thoughts in his head unraveled a bit. Midoriya looked down at Nezu for a moment, nodding as he responded. Quote. Yes, I think I was waiting for you. He pushed off the wall, straightening himself as his thoughts straightened out a touch. He had a lot of untangling to do, but this was a good start. He adjusted his coat as he walked, eyes fixed on Nezu as he said about setting one final thing straight, something he probably should have done a long time ago and the first favor he should have asked for. Now that he realized how everyone else was affected by his disappearance, there was one person he had to meet or at least one more person he had to try and help. I want to see Koda again. Chapter end notes. Yo, I'm back again. This chapter took a little longer cause me and my editor were really trying to fine-tune it. Usually, my editor only fixes bad grammar and spelling mistakes, but this time we messed around ITH the ending of the chapter a few times to try and get it right. I'm so glad I wanted to make a fanfic about fighting, that's why I spend most of my time trying to wrangle the emotional moments. It's been stated many times that I like seeing protagonists struggle and even fail sometimes, and here we are, having a fun time kicking Ronin and his biggest weak point, the part of being a hero he's terrible at. I've wanted to do this chapter for a while, but surprise, it was much more difficult to write than I expected even with my planning. Now, one more shout out to my editor Ebony Bird of Doom for going above and beyond helping me workshop this, and thanks to you for reading this. I like experimenting around with my writing, and this was fun even though it was difficult. Hope I helped to get the emotions across, and if not, feedback's always welcome. But for now, adios amigos. Chapter 225, Reflecting but not realizing. Chapter summary. Midoriya tries venting his frustrations about teaching to a violent gangster turned. No, wait, he's still a gangster, and he still works for the #1 criminal in the world. That might explain why his answer was so shitty. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Ronin hadn't planned to go out that night. He had planned to reflect on his lessons, to try and study up on what he had done compared to his plans and adjust accordingly, but he couldn't stay still. Hosu City was abuzz with life below, a very vibrant place by all accounts even if it was still damaged. But a few months ago, the hero killer and a horde of Nomu swept through the place, causing untold havoc and damage until the heroes stopped them. The fight didn't even last all night, but a lot of structural damage now stuck to the city from the small things like bent signs to entirely unusable bridges and roads. Ronin was looking down on the city from the vantage of a partially wrecked building, having already collapsed under its weight and damage. Funnily enough, he was fairly certain he was just a few blocks from where he fought the hero killer staying, even if he wasn't here for the killer this time. While the hero killer was still evading the public eye, other criminals had come to Hosu City like the Yakuza Ronin had accidentally chased out of Musutafu. The slightly wrecked city with its disrupted security and spooked civilians was the perfect place for a crew of crooks to try and set up. Ronin had missed their first meeting here trying to establish a new clientele. He couldn't be everywhere at once, but he'd been planning to try and interrupt their third meeting. He could let them settle down a bit, get some roots down, and draw in more victims before he came around to pull them all out and beat the shit out of them. But now, he needed to do something, anything, and kicking these drug runners was just the thing he needed. Beside him, completely relaxed even as Ronin prodded along about the detail, the main man himself sat amidst the rubble, tossing rocks across the road to try and throw one through a broken window on the far side. He was barely paying attention as Ronin, or more specifically Midoriya, rambled on and on, the pair watching as two buildings over some shady figures made their moves. Mao was, of course, half listening just to see if Midoriya would say anything interesting but not about the plans to take out the villains, no. They already had that plan, Mao entering from the front to surprise and confuse them while Ronin waited at the escape routine emergency exit at the back of the building. Anyone trying to run from Mao would fight Ronin, and anyone trying to fight Mao was stuck fighting Mao. The duo were fairly awful at working together, so instead of fighting together, this plan should let them both do what they did best while not putting them in each other's way. But that was already set, with no reason to discuss it more. What Midoriya was instead talking about was something far more foreign and, admittedly, boring to his partner in crime, trying and failing to teach some kids. I couldn't think of anything to say. Midoriya stared off the edge of the building, staring straight past the shady figures moving into the target building, concealed by a broken window and the rubble around him. Well, I could think of things to say, but they all sucked. And I don't want to tell him some bullshit, I want to help him. Help put him to sleep? Mao was lying against a collapsed wall, adjusting himself as he lay down and moving the broken brickwork to get as comfy as possible, admittedly caring almost nothing about whatever the hell Midoriya was talking about. He was just here to see if he could bring that building down while he was fighting. I don't know how to help him, though. Midoriya was fine with Mao nitpicking, at least he was listening. Hell, at this point, Midoriya might have tried talking to a wall, anything to get it out of his system. He felt like he had to tell someone like he had to do something, but he had no idea what. It's not like fighting, you can't beat the shit out of whatever this is. Fuck. Midoriya punched the wall, making a small stream of dust fall down. Mao glanced up at the roof, a little uncertain in its stability, but seeing it collapse on Midoriya mid-ran would be pretty funny, so he kept his mouth shut. What was I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Midoriya could still see it, him putting his hand on Kaminari's shoulder. What the fuck was that supposed to do? Comfort Kaminari, comfort himself, and telling Kaminari he'd be there next time. Fuck next time, Kaminari needed help now. His clawed hand slammed into the wall again as he stared into the night angrily. Fuck. You ever felt like that, Mao? Midoriya glanced at his larger companion, who was almost completely shapeshifted to the right form. Mao was still bigger than Midoriya, and his body had become pretty close to Midoriya's, if only a lot taller, buffer, and alright, it wasn't that close, but since no one knew what Yakuza Hunter really looked like, it was good enough. Mao thought about Midoriya's words for a second, tilting his head as he reflected on himself, then looked him in the eye and gave a little shrug as he spoke. Quote. Nah. Tisk. Midoriya turned back to the view, frustrated as Mao picked himself out of the rubble, brushing some small rocks off his back. I'm not saying I never failed, pal, I'm just saying backquote I never done what you're trying backquote to do. Mao moved beside Ronin, leaning against the broken wall as they both looked out to their target. Already, you could see more people moving about, dark figures shifting in darker shadows. Looked to be at least 20 people so far. Helping people with dear feelings backquote and sheet. Dad ain't my scene. Mao nodded to a man vaping outside the building, a man wearing a poofy orange jacket despite the warm weather representative from the Shiga Saikai, and the type of guy he and Midoriya had floored a dozen of already. Mao was already ready to add one more to that count, saying, Dad's my scene. Dis is my scene. Dis is what backquote I do. Wanna talk feelings backquote. Get a therapist. My daughter has one. She loves that lady. Mao reached for a cigarette before being swatted once again by Midoriya, earning a silent scolding about giving away their position again. He relented, putting the box of cigarettes away as he leaned against the wall. Ya gotta know ya scene, man, and play to ya strengths. That's how ya get back. But helping people should be my scene. Midoriya wasn't getting it, at least, he was pretending he didn't. That was why he didn't look Mao in the eyes, instead staring at the target building as the Yakuza enforcer in the orange jacket spoke to someone else. Helping people is what a hero does. Sure. Oh, Mao watched as the Yakuza enforcer and the other man headed inside, probably to get business started, and gave Midoriya a light slap on the back that sent him stumbling forward while the main man rose to move. Well, you keep working backquote on data helping backquote cheat, vigilante, I'ma go do something backquote productive. Tell ya what, you stay here, I'll shoot ya a call when I'm done. Quote. Asshole. Ronin straightened out, donning his mask as he punched the main man in the arm, the two moving forward with very different feelings that only started to line up when a small section of the roof collapsed onto both of them, showering them with broken plaster and rubble. Sheet. The raid opened with a door flying off its hinges entirely. The criminals inside gathered around a few suitcases now turned their gaze over as a massive figure dominated the doorway, resting its metal-studded club against his shoulder. It saw itself in with a massive smile both on and under its mask, enjoying the scene before it. Two men in jackets moved forward as most of the crowd grabbed their things and pulled back further into the building. A cross between a freight train and a man on his left, and some kind of sharpshooter pointing his fingers at the incoming giant like a gun. Now, the main man always preferred melees, but he could take some diversity in his diet. Making this more fun, he honestly wasn't that hyped, so he'd need to think a little bit for once. That's what made this sheet interesting. Mao moved in with excitement, tossing the bat to one side as Thomas the tank engine built up speed, tackling him with a massive amount of momentum that even the main man couldn't stop all at once. A large weight rammed into his stomach, the two sliding back while the Yakuza towards the back lined up his shot. This trained motherfucker wasn't that strong, but he was heavy as sheet, and with the right momentum he was hard to knock off course. Mao dug his feet down just to keep them under himself, pushing against his attacker and lowering his body to get a better grip before suddenly leaning back and pulling up to lift this tanky Yakuza into the air. It was difficult, and it sure as sheet wasn't fast, but the sudden move killed the trained guy's moment and made that shooter guy in the back think twice about taking a shot. Mao was still stumbling back, surprised that he couldn't completely negate the first guy's momentum, but decided to make the most of it. As the trained guy planted a foot onto Mao and kicked off him, Mao shoved him back and down, throwing the trained Yakuza into the ground then following it up with a harsh kick to the head before he could get up. That hefty motherfucker ate Mao's kick for breakfast, spitting blood to one side and blocking the next kick with his arm while peeling himself off the ground. Mao went in for a third kick just as something cold crashed into him from just out of view, shards of ice stabbing into the massive target of his broad chest and knocking him on his ass in turn. Mao laughed at his own carelessness as he caught himself, planting his 2 feet to steady himself, now paying a bit more attention to the second Yakuza with some kind of ice quirk, one of the rarest elemental quirks. Man, if the boss were still in town, he could probably get a pretty penny if he kidnapped Frosty Fingers over there, but that was another life now, and in this life, he in turn stopped paying attention to Thomas the Tankuza and ate a running armbar to the face for his stupidity. The two fighters had pretty good chemistry by pacing alone. While they fought in drastically different ways, they left openings for each other to attack, or maybe, they covered each other in their natural openings. Either way, seemed to work pretty well by how easily they fired off attack after attack into Mao's body. Mao was pushed around pretty harshly by the trained Yakuza, knocked back over the door he broke on his way in and pushed into the doorframe. Choo-choo Charles ran in, ducking low as he body checked Mao, ramming his shoulder against the main man's stomach. Mao anchored in, slamming a knee into the Yakuza's lowered form, then ate another shot of ice to the face. He took one step back, grabbing the Yakuza in front of him as he moved back and out of the building to his back, letting his legs go out from under him. The Yakuza pushed harder, his legs buckled, then. With a practice ease Mao grabbed the Yakuza in front of him and flipped backward, slamming the trained motherfucker back first onto the street. The Yakuza's own forward momentum made it hella easy, despite his heavy weight, and that same heavy weight was what made the attack so good. With one taken care of for a moment, Mao brushed the snow off his face as he moved back indoors and took another chunk of ice to the face. It ate up his vision, shattered into chunks and clung to him slightly. With one hand he wiped his face off as he moved forward, and with that same hand blocked the next shot of much smaller ice as the Yakuza began to realize how fucked he was with nothing between him and the main man. He fired more ice, and fired faster, creating lots of smaller ice shots before the main man bowled into him, grabbing him by his hands and breaking his fingers before he could shoot off any more ice. He was shoved into the wall as Mao began to fire off a quick combination to his face, denting the wall with his human punching bag before the other Yakuza got back up. Mao barely glanced over, adjusting the mask that was falling off his face to hide his smile as he let the second Yakuza drop like a sack of bricks, unconscious. He spread his arms wide as the first Yakuza rammed into him, shoving him across the tile and throwing him back, and laughing like a maniac for every second of it. Now this was his scene. Ronin waited quietly in the alleyway behind the building, spinning the gun on his finger as he stared at the back door. A garbage dumpster sat in front of the second exit and the third led to the roof. All signs pointed to this being the escape route, but Ronin had to draw them out with a sense of safety to make sure they tried to escape instead of hide. So he lurked. He hid slightly out of sight, watching that back door, waiting for it to open. It would open, the targets would run through, and he would intervene, scaring them into either giving up, fighting him, or running back to try and deal with Mao. He had his zip ties, he had kindness, and he had everything he needed. He was thoroughly prepared, as far as he knew. He could handle this. Busting some Yakuza drug ring before it even started something he'd done 3 times so far. He just needed to rattle the newcomers to keep them away, to make sure everyone knew dealing with the Yakuza was bad business. That would starve them out, and when a starved prey got desperate, it would try some pretty stupid shit. Something that the heroes should be able to catch. This was what he did, ambushing criminals from out of sight. It was what he was good at. Had it been 2 years since he started yet? It felt close, but maybe it passed already. Still, 2 years. That was a lot of time to get good at his trade. One person threw open the door, the fastest arriving first. She glanced around, panicked, and then ran towards the street. Even as she moved away from Ronin, he made no move. He needed the others to come out to see him, to make one large impression and inspire fear in them. That would get the reaction he was looking for. Inspiring fear, stopping criminals, beating villains, they were all good things, good in his hands. He could use that fear, he could stop the criminals and stop their crimes. There'd be no drug ring if he beat every drug runner into the ground, right here and now. The others got up quickly, just a few seconds behind the first. They didn't have her hesitation as they ran behind her, following her lead and running after her to try and get out of the cramped alley. Even she didn't notice the sights of a pistol as Ronin aimed ahead of her, timing it out before firing a single small air shot into her legs. This was good. The woman stumbled as if something struck her leg, causing her to falter right as Ronin dove off from the nearby roof, his cloak catching the wind and flaring like wings before he fell on the woman, grabbing her by a shoulder and slamming their 2 heads together. She screamed as something fell upon her, but was silenced as skull met helmet and fell back limply. This was helping. The rest of the criminals slowed to a sudden stop as Ronin glanced over his shoulder, still holding the woman by her shoulders. They took some steps back as he turned, activating Beowulf in the bodysuit to lift her limp body before throwing her like a weapon at the small crowd. The attack had barely any power, to make sure that first woman didn't break her neck, but it struck a hard blow against the criminal's confidence. Where were the heroes who were supposed to do this? Some of the criminals ran back into the building like Ronin wanted. Some tried to find a new way out, running the other way. A few even just stood there, panicked. They were drug sellers, in between for the Yakuza and the junkies, not real villains. What the hell was someone who spent their days peddling drugs supposed to do in a time like this? Why were no professional heroes here? Why did no one move to stop this drug ring? Did the heroes not know, or just not care? Ronin dealt with the runners first, raising kindness and drawing Cupid to fire off a quick barrage. His shooting was sloppy, but with the wide impact range of the guns, they slammed into the runners, knocking them off balance with sudden and unseen force. He was here, doing what the heroes could not know, what they did not. They could be here, with the police sitting idly on the side waiting to take the criminals that the heroes had finished off. They could take down this whole ring. There was, 10 heroes in Hosu at least. Why were 2 vigilantes doing their job for them? Ronin snarled as one person moved towards him, adjusting his aim to shoot one of the man's feet. The man shifted suddenly from a charge to a stumble, giving Ronin an easy opportunity to slip right by, but he instead leaned into it, wrapping the leg between the man's and an arm over the man's head, then throwing him roughly into the ground as he learned in judo class. He finished it by turning his gun down, shooting the man 6 times before finishing it with a hard kick to the ribs. He was doing a hero's job. But was he doing it right? Was beating up criminals like this a way of a real hero? Ronin saw someone trying to run past as he was distracted. He turned, grinding his foot into his last victims just as he raised both guns and fired center mass. Even with his lackluster aim, one of the shots hit dead on, and the other slammed into the next criminal's shoulder, creating a moment of weakness. When he had been bullied, with the class picking on him and Bakugo kicking into him, he hadn't wanted someone to beat all his bullies up, he wanted someone to save him, just like how All Might and the other heroes in his videos always saved everyone. Ronin left off the body, checking the criminal with his shoulder and shooting out their legs with a gun. They were off balance, unable to defend themselves, and easy pickings as he fired one more shot center mass before stepping in and slamming the handle of his pistol into their skull twice, breaking their jaw and then leaving them slumped on the floor. Was this what real heroes did? Hell, were real heroes even real? Saving everyone. Even All Might couldn't do that. No one could. That was how life worked. If someone could save everyone, there'd be no more crime at all or something. Ronin looked down at his last victim, then at the broken teeth before him. His scowl deepened as he turned, raising both pistols at targets who'd already run back inside. He kept a gun raised and trigger finger ready as he moved towards the slightly immobilized figures on the ground, holstering Cupid as he went for those zip ties. Was it really enough to just do what he was good at? He was good at dealing with villains, not the civilians. He'd just taken on almost 20 people with 2 pistols and one. Could most heroes do that? Could most heroes take on a bunch of spook drug runners with no real combat experience facing a guy with 2 guns? What a question. Ronin shook his head as he pushed through the babbling of the criminals, dodging a swift elbow and grabbing the criminal by the head, ready to slam them into the ground. Then tightening his grip, breathing out, and letting go to focus on getting those zip ties finished. He had to do a job, and at the very least, he could do a good job at the job he was good at. By the end, the criminals were pulled together around some Yakuza with a motor quirk, probably similar to Ingenium. He was buried in the ground, staring absent-mindedly at the ceiling with wide eyes, surrounded by cracked stone and broken tile. It seemed easier to bring everyone here than to try getting this guy out. Dat style lasso backquote M. Mao worked his shoulders, looking over the scene with a satisfied tone. He picked up his Kanabo, which must have been dropped during the fight, and returned to Ronin's side just as he started to call the police with some of the phones lying around. Preda backquote fun, honestly. Man, ya shoulda backquote seen it train face here wasn't paying attention when these losers came running back and fucking sent out flying. He landed in Dad Gear Wall, right next to the door. Funny as fuck. Ooh. Ronin was in little mood to humor Mao, but the main man also served as a welcome distraction from his own worries, so he could at least laugh a little. Settling on somewhere in the middle, Ronin just shook his head while smirking to himself at Mao's story, grabbing the criminal's phone, calling the cops, then tossing it and grabbing the next. With so many emergency calls coming from one very traceable area, the cops would be here in probably 6 to 8 minutes. Not suppose you're gonna help me with this. Mao glanced over as Ronin held up a phone, scoffing at the idea and dismissing the idea with a wave of his hand. Fact no, man, I helped out plenty, you got this. Ronin could only roll his eyes as he finished up, settling on just using 6 phones to call the cops. That should be enough to get the police's attention. He took one last look at the criminals to make sure everyone was nice and stuck before moving after him out of the exit. I'm going to stick around to make sure none of them escape, at least. Until that popo right up, yee. Another wave of Mao's big hand as they walked out, moving back toward their initial hideout, the crumbling building that had crumbled a little bit right on top of them a few minutes ago. It might have looked shabby, but it had a good view of the entrance and an alright view of the side exit. As long as nobody tried hopping out a window, they'd be able to see any runners. They only had to wait a few minutes for the telltale sound of sirens. There were no runners, none that they could see, and in just 7 minutes, 2 officers arrived on the scene in one car. Even from up high, Ronin and Mao could see the confusion as the 2 officers went inside for about 10 seconds, then walked right back to their car to order backup to help detain all these criminals. There would be some easy arrests tonight with the drugs and money on site. It was unlikely any of them were getting out. Mao was already satisfied, heading off on his own as soon as he heard the sirens with a parting pat on the back and a cheery smile. Ronin stayed longer, wanting to wait until the police van arrived to cart away all the criminals. They bid one another goodbye, making some quick plans for the upcoming days before parting ways. Midoriya had a lot of free time the next day. His UA lesson started around 12:30, after when they finished their lunch, so as long as he got there before 12:30 he was free to do whatever he liked. That Tuesday, he chose to take a nap to catch up on the sleep he lost. He had definitely stayed out too late. He took his nap and woke up at his old Riverside training grounds. He couldn't go to school, he said he'd be missing a whole week. He couldn't stay home, his mom didn't know he was skipping a week. This little spot by a tiny brook was the perfect hiding spot to sleep in the sun. If it didn't start raining, but what could you do? Midoriya made do with napping under a tree, earning him a sore back and a few leaves in his hair for his troubles. Wiping the sleep and stray droplets from his face, Midoriya shut off the alarm he set and stared into the rain, pondering his options before making a few decisions. He tossed off his civilian attire, donning the familiar bodysuit and coat of Ronin before tying his hair back and putting on the grayish-brown wig, securing it with bobby pins. He finished securing it by tying his signature bandana over his eyes, turning the world slightly blurry and darker. It was sometimes difficult to see in through the bandana, like in dark places, which is why he usually kept it around his brow instead of his eye shelf to keep his hair out of his way while putting on his helmet too. It was still easy to slide over his eyes in case he ever needed to don it as a disguise, but it mostly stayed out of the way's avenue for a few times he tied it too loosely, and it had slid down over his eyes. Pulling the knot tight, Midoriya gave himself a quick pat over he had all his stuff, so next up was makeup. Midoriya set his phone on a few branches with the camera showing his face, acting as a mirror as he applied his usual scars. It occurred to Midoriya that maybe he should take a picture of what his makeup looked like someday, so he'd stop applying it by memory, but that would only work if he had a mirror so he could see both his current fact and the face he was aiming for. He could get a handheld mirror or something for his hideout later. But that'd be later. It was time to go. Taking the train to UA was always odd, just because he saw other heroes while on the way over. In times like these, he kept most of his weapons in his bag and his sword tucked under his coat. Every day, he was thankful that the energy absorption in his bodysuit absorbed heat, otherwise he would have melted long before he got to the gigantic high school. Even with the rain, it was still well into the 80s. The train was pretty empty when Midoriya got on a Tuesday, before noon. The people were busy with their own business, from office workers running their papers to students stuck in their classes like they should be. And here he was, skipping class to go teach some good people to try and be better. That was a laugh and a half, but for some reason, he wasn't laughing. The thing that did get a smirk out of him, at least a morbid one, was sitting on the train some 20 feet from 2 groups of heroes, talking casually to one another as they also headed to UA. It was part of the Hero Center in Musudafu, with many hero agencies stationed around it. All Might had a branch within a few blocks of the place, run by his old sidekick Sir Night. There had to be at least a score of other agencies around there that he couldn't remember off the top of his head. Midoriya kept his head down and his mouth shut tight, instead reflecting by going over his notes and adjusting accordingly. Bakugo was ahead of schedule, which he had accounted for and had made entire days of extra things to do just in case of benefit of knowing each other outside of school. Zero had used his tape in an interesting and unorthodox way that could be very powerful if developed correctly, so Midoriya would have to figure out what was the correct development and help Zero towards it. Most of the students were like that. While some were a little outside his wheelhouse, like Mina's acid or Kirishima's fighting style, he could do his best to adjust. He might have no experience using a quirk like Mina's acid, but he was pretty good at running around, so while he'd encourage her to develop her quirk he would focus on what he could do. Kirishima and Sato were a little harder, as he wasn't actually that good with their fighting styles. He was a sword fighter, not a boxer, and certainly not a grappler. He could pass on some of the basic judo he knew, but other than the boxing and wrestling basics he looked up to prepare for this, Midoriya wasn't sure he had good answers for them. He should have practiced boxing and wrestling last night using the fighting styles for himself on the villains. Revenant's brow furrowed again as he faced a truth that was obvious in hindsight. Last night's fights hadn't been very hard. It would have been little work to go out of his comfort zone and try a different fighting style, yet he'd been so distracted, he hadn't thought of it until now 40 minutes in closing until he was supposed to teach. What good was the realization now? Well, this realization would be good for tonight. The next time he'd go onto the streets to fight, but it would be of no use at the moment. Revenant made a reminder for himself, then checked the time in the hero news. The Yakuza he'd been taking down weren't coming up in the news for some reason. In fact, none of the Yakuza he'd been taking down were coming up. Searching around, he could barely find any trace of the Yakuza in the hero news, and what he did find he had to actively search for. Did the Yakuza have someone inside the hero news network? No, that was ridiculous. The hero news network was a network of several different branches all reporting on heroes and villains, and it would have to be several people working together to cover up all of the Yakuza. Maybe someone up top could do it, like a network official or a high-ranked hero, but that'd be harder to prove and much harder for him to discover in the first place. Hopefully, if he cut out the roots, the higher-ups would fall too. Good enough of the lower level, and it should affect everyone in the Yakuza. The fact that the Yakuza were avoiding Musudafu was a sign of something, and he hoped it was that his plan was working. But as Yue rolled into view through the train window, Midoriya's mind switched back to his current problems, keeping his head down as the train slowed to a stop and he followed out the pro heroes to the streets. Arriving on time, the new day started pretty much identical to the last, meeting Nezu in the entrance hall of UA and taking a little cart down to the gyms. There were a few changes, though, like Ronin arriving before 1A so he could set up instead of running late. Class 1B had just left for lunch as they rolled up, leaving behind Smintas to clean up. From what he saw of the last class, 1A's homeroom teacher Eraserhead would probably be supervising, plus their heroics teacher All Might. All Might was probably at lunch or resting right now. He didn't look great the last time Ronin saw him, and shouldn't be pushing himself too hard. Ronin gave Smintas a little wave as he walked in, thanking him for his work. Has to be hard setting this up for both classes, all day. Want something to drink? Smintas accepted the Gatorade with a raised eyebrow, glancing at Nezu before opening it. One gets used to it with time. Using my quirk in small but frequent ways is little compared to my heroism days. Most of this work is simply repairing damage, nothing of great effort. Ronin nodded, not really understanding Smintas's words but the meaning they hoped. While Ronin thought reshaping an entire gymnasium over and over was hard work, compared to dealing with city blocks made of different structures, avoiding things like electrical wires and sewage pipes, and especially not having to deal with civilians and focusing just on your work, it probably was easier for Smintas than Ronin first thought, kind of like how a backflip was easier to Ronin than most people. At least, that's how he read it. They parted ways, with Ronin moving to his own gymnasium to prepare. The gym was as clean as a whistle, any sign of yesterday's fight swept clear from the minor breaks in the building to the blood Kaminari had left on the road. The provisional license exam always happened in foe cities, with recreations of disasters from natural to villainous. The main things past students were judged on were damage control, rescuing, and cooperation, the three main things that most heroes should be good at. If the students were anything like him he could imagine Exam F would struggle with at least one of those three principles. Ronin checked the clock, dropping his bag by the entrance and beginning his own warm-ups. The students would be getting here soon, and if they were going to do their best, he'd have to give them his best. So, Ronin stretched his arms, widened his stance, and leaned back against a wall as he reread his notes over Exam F, just to be sure. Chapter End Notes. Yo, shout out to Ebony Bird of Doom, who came up with and already trademarked the name Thomas the Tankuza. Now that he has a name, I'm contractually obligated to use him at least one more time, so look forward to seeing him again. In chapter 300 or something, IDK. This chapter didn't feel that long, since it's just an intermediate chapter to try and develop on some of the problems of last chapter, but it was also fun to write a little fight scene with Mao not really that hyped up, and a Ronin who's really not feeling it. I felt it was important to show how Ronin deals with his problems both mental and physical, by suiting up and beating up criminals to try and make himself feel better even when he realizes it isn't working. It's an avenue he's passionate about, at least, and it's something he can put his stress into but it's not very healthy. Someday, he'll find a healthier hobby, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be in the epilogue of this series since it hinges on his bad decisions. Oh tilde well tilde. Thanks to Ebony Bird of Doom again for editing, even when they have their real job to do, and thanks to all of you for reading this. I hope you enjoyed the little emotion in the action as much as I enjoyed writing it, and until we meet again, adios amigos. Chapter 226, Training Exercises. Chapter Summary. The training that Midoriya had planned, finally in motion, and still not going how he planned, and at this point, isn't things going wrong the real plan. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The school day started with Kaminari in the recovery ward, waking late to a dull ache spreading through his body. He was already missing first hour, and by the time recovery girl had checked him out and given him the okay to leave, the clock was starting to push into the second or so when he finally got to class. Luckily, the class he'd been partially skipping was math, so his pain kept to just the physical kind for now. Ectoplasm saw Kaminari to his seat, then continued teaching on like normal. In a way, this was normal. Hero Corps students did get often injured, as professional heroes did in the real world. One of the girls in his class, Uraraka, had her legs crushed just in the entrance exam, so it was little wonder that the class would just keep trucking, same as normal. Or so Kaminari thought. But as class ended and their break started, Kaminari found himself suddenly the center of attention. Surrounded by the rest of Exam F, he was bombarded with praise from all sides, with some even from the Tsuneri Bakugo. A rare treat indeed. How many in the class could say they got a compliment from Bakugo, even if it was a little backhanded? Kaminari smiled through it, and even some of the other students chimed in just to see what was going on with Exam F retelling the story of his fight against Ronin to everyone. It started with Kaminari blushing, but as he went on, it seemed to go a little different than he remembered. From the outside, his moves were being described as cool and flashy, the kind of thing that he remembered Ronin's moves being. They talked about how he made his big moves, his insane speed, and how hard he pushed himself. But they didn't mention that his big flashy moves didn't land once and that his own insane speed was the reason he had so many bruises and burns. Was this why Ronin had switched styles? In a moment of self-reflection, Kaminari compared his fighting style to Ronin's, finding them fairly similar. His style was based on Ronin's. Maybe Ronin had a similar experience to his, maybe that was the fight all of 1A had seen back in the summer training camp. That was kind of wild. Kaminari was distracted by his thoughts through all of computer tech, learning jack shit from his teacher as he instead turned it over in his mind. If Ronin had hit a roadblock in his own style before, then that should mean that his current style was the solution Ronin had thought up. It was definitely a weird style, just standing around and letting your opponent do everything. But maybe that only worked against opponents who were really fast. Like the best way to counter a button masher was to build a little distance, then use the steadier moves that couldn't be countered on accident. Lunch came and went for most of 1A fast as could be, the students heading off in droves to claim their seats and meals. Kaminari got a small ways with his friends before he had to break off to visit the medical ward and get his last look over before he went to training. Aha, Recovery girl looked over Kaminari's legs with a careful eye, making all sorts of little sounds to herself as she wrote something down on her clipboard. Kaminari was sitting down, with his pants rolled up above the knee to show off his legs. He had been swathed in bandaging, ice packs, and compresses last night all while he slept, but now only the compresses for his knees and ankles sat next to him on the bed. He got those compresses handed right back to him as Recovery girl finished her inspection. You're lucky you're young. Recovery girl shook her head at Kaminari, but helped him put the compresses back around his leg joints as she gave him the basics. As long as you don't push your limbs, you should be fine. Don't carry anything over 50 kilos, no running, and no using your quirk. I'll know if you did. If you can manage all of that. Recovery girl's expression softened as she helped Kaminari to his feet, smiling up at him as she gingerly patted his leg. If you can keep your pace down, I'm sure our next meeting will be our last, for this problem, at least. Kaminari nodded for a second, then thought it over and realized just how confusing that was. Wait, if I can't lift 40 kilos or run, how am I supposed to train today? I've got to practice for the big exam thing coming up. I'm sure Ronin can cook up something for you to do, sweetie, Recovery girl said in a sweet but firm tone, pushing the boy's shoes next to him. Making a training regimen for someone who's injured, HMPH, I dare say that'll be one of the easiest things he's done this year. Kaminari sighed, reflecting on Ronin for a moment and all the problems he must have gone through. Fighting at the camp, nearly dying, escaping capture, and then having to deal with his Slavia apprentice twice now. Or, did this still count as just dealing with him once, and it was a lot longer than he first thought? Either way, not a great look for him. Kaminari rubbed the back of his head, tying his shoes and seeing himself out with 2 notices, one for a special high-energy food to go, for lunch rush, and one as an exception to any hard labor, for Ronin. Reading the second one over as he made his way to the cafeteria, Kaminari wondered if he could hide it and still get some training in, but then, Recovery girl did say she'd know if he didn't follow her advice, and plus there was no way Ronin wouldn't notice either. Did he really think he could pull the wool over that guy's eyes? This whole mess left Kaminari's head spinning as he made his way to the cafeteria, getting his food just in time for lunch to end, and being stuck running after his class before Aizawa shouted at him to walk. This was gonna be a long training exercise. This stayed slow as 1A rolled up to the gyms. With UA's freeform teaching, the students were left completely to their own devices in the gyms. Sure, ectoplasm was there to make clones to fight, and Smintas was overseeing the grounds, but actually figuring out what you'd be doing was up to the students. Exam F had it a little easier than the rest, naturally drawn to the neighboring gym where they found their private teacher already waiting. Ronin was waiting for them 20 or so feet from the entrance, with his bag of tricks open but resting innocuously to one side. The small man himself was leaning against a wall, reading a book very familiar to the ones recovered from the summer training camp grounds, the training books made for each of the members. Exam F only had a few moments to look at the book before Ronin snapped the notes shut, pushing himself off the wall and walking forward with a smile to greet them. We'll be repeating the order we fought in yesterday for training. Ronin skipped straight into the rules, tapping the whiteboard in the general area of the gymnasium between the entrance and the faux city. The names of Exam F, save Monoma, were written there in order in time for when they'd switch in and out. To make sure everyone gets a fair amount of time, though, we won't be doing any repeat training that way. Everyone gets one slot with me, to use however you see fit. Any questions? Bakugo grumbled, but most of the cast were happy to go along with this. There were only 3 hours left in school anyway, split between 6 of them, with breaks between them. They were gonna be short for time before anybody got 2 slots with teach back quote. Excellent, then Bakugo's up. Kirishima, you're on deck, so it's up to you to get here in time for your lesson to start. Ronin made brief eye contact with each student as he spoke to them, staying still as he finished his address to them and dismissed them. The rest of you, I'll see you at your training periods. Good luck, now, dismiss. And with a dramatic turn causing his coattails to flare up, Ronin moved to the city with Bakugo close in time, ready to begin. The training itself wasn't that interesting, and in fact, it was fairly similar to yesterday's work. Bakugo spent most of his time using Ronin as a live target, training his aim against a high-speed target to practice his longer-range attacks. This was a pretty good use of his time, in Midoriya's head at least. While most of Exam F could practice against robots, the robots weren't mobile enough to pose a real threat like he could jumping over walls, weaving through buildings, and that sort of thing. The unpredictability of a real human was hard to match. This was, ironically, one of the easiest training exercises for Midoriya to do both because of how simple it was and because Bakugo had a clear idea of what he wanted to spend the training time doing. Even better, Midoriya knew how to help him, advising him to try skeet shooting in his own time as UA definitely had a skeet shooter somewhere in its mess of halls, robots, and other junk. The small tidbits of time not spent chasing were used to fine-tune some of Bakugo's ultimate moves. There wasn't a lot of work on that front, they had 3 more days to work it out, but deciding which moves needed to be safer and which ones should be stronger was an easy enough starting point. By the time Bakugo's time wrapped up, he had spent over 20 minutes chasing Midoriya through the cement streets while they shouted ideas at one another. Seeing Bakugo off with a smile as Kirishima came in, Midoriya mused that this was probably the closest they'd ever been. How things had changed. And how some stayed the same. Midoriya had unfortunately predicted what would happen next. The last time he had trained with Kirishima, the young man who was only a few months younger than him didn't have a clue what he wanted his ultimate move to be. Hell, last time, Kirishima didn't even know how he wanted to use his training time. It seemed that, unfortunately, Kirishima still didn't know what he wanted to do. Not for lack of trying, if his exasperated expression was anything to go by. I'm sorry, teach back quote. Kirishima couldn't quite meet Midoriya's gaze, staring off to the side while laughing nervously. He seemed to be thinking hard, but creating an ultimate move for a defensive quirk like his wasn't easy. It's fine not to have an ultimate move, you know. Midoriya tried to console him with a few hero facts, like a few statistics you could find online if you searched. 85% of heroes have ultimate moves, but most don't use them in their fights. In fact, an ultimate move is usually used more for publicity than to actually win a fight in modern heroics. Yeah, and I can't even do that. Kirishima seemed more disheartened by this, looking at his hands sadly. A dull quirk that can't even do an ultimate move. That's like, dullness squared or something. Well, at least Midoriya had enough sense to say this was the wrong angle to try and approach it from. He switched tactics, shaking his head. Heroes like Eraserhead and Death Arms don't have ultimate moves, and they're still pretty popular at least. Eraserhead's as popular as an underground hero can be. A quirk itself doesn't have to be flashy, or manly, it can be in the user. After all, Mao. Midoriya trailed off as he realized that, even if he brought up Mao a bad idea to start, Kirishima would have no idea who the fuck he was talking about. All bringing that jackass up would do is raise questions. Quote ... Mao. Kirishima thought over the name, tilting his head to one side as he chewed on it. Gotta be honest, teach back quote. I don't think I've ever heard of a hero named Mao. That's not a very heroic name, either. While Mao's actual name was just gibberish, translating as a kind of movement into Japanese, it sounded pretty similar to Moa word that translated roughly as a super powerful supernatural creature of supreme evil. And holy shit, that was probably what Mao intended his name to be, but his own shitty pronunciation of Japanese turned Mao into Mao. That fucking dumbass. It took all of Midoriya's will not to facepalm or scream Mao's name in frustration, or rather, scream Mao's name in frustration, but he could deal with that dumbass later. He goes by Yakuza Hunter right now. Thinking over how to spin it, Revenant tried to lean into it. In a way, Mao was a great example as he almost stumbled into despite having 3 quirks. Mao's fighting style revolved almost entirely around his hype and the many things he could pull off because of it. Hype itself was a very simple quirk, with no discernible tell save for the incredible damage it could shrug off, which was badass in its own way. In that way, he was the perfect ideal for Kirishima and what the young man was looking for. As long as he didn't idealize Mao's shitty personality. But he's a great fighter you could learn a lot from. Midoriya avoided calling Mao a great person, sticking to this route to hopefully make some progress. While he talked, he tried to think if Mao, or whatever the hell he was supposed to be called had any ultimate moves he could steal and teach to Kirishima. His quirk is very similar to yours, a pure defense quirk, with a mostly hand-to-hand fighting style too. Midoriya let his mumbling take the reins, but even thinking through all his thoughts, it was pretty clear Mao didn't have any real ultimate moves. When he met, Mao had tried to demolish the building they were fighting in and called it an ultimate move, but dropping buildings on people wasn't a very heroic thing to do. Even with a simple and plain quirk, though, he's one of the strongest people I know. Even without an ultimate move, Mao was a beast though. There was a reason even Midoriya could call him the main man even if his Japanese was shit. With just his quirk, some martial arts, and a ton of confidence, he's taken on as many as 12 men at once. He's been surrounded, shot, outmanned, but never outmatched. Kirishima was surprisingly interested in Midoriya's ramblings, leaning forward a little as he listened. 12 people, at once. His quirk must be pretty awesome. It is awesome. Midoriya couldn't deny Mao's quirk, not while being honest, but there was more to it than that. But it's nothing without the person using it. Yakuza Hunter is a great martial artist, and it's in his hands and with his confidence that he's able to take his quirk so far. It's one thing to shrug off bullets, but it's another to walk towards them. Huh. Kirishima looked at Midoriya in amazement, probably a little unsure if this was a tall tale or a true story. His eyes flicked down to two things under Midoriya's coat. I don't know if I'm even bulletproof. Do you think we could? They'd gotten so far without doing any actual training, and still without a real direction, just talking. Midoriya wondered if this was the right direction, but maybe Kirishima could use whatever they talk about here to train himself but shooting himself just for practice. No way. It's not safe. Kirishima was definitely a little bummed by Ronin's response, pushing it harder. But isn't training the safest place to practice this sort of stuff? It's better to do it here than in the field. It's better to never do it. Midoriya countered, but that was a weak argument. As a combat hero, especially in this day and age, Kirishima would probably encounter things a lot worse than a few 9mm bullets in just his first year of being a hero. That's why he had to nod along in spite of what he said, even if he didn't like it. Quote. But it is safer to do it here in training, but it's not something you should just do on a whim. Revenant reorganized his thoughts, listing a few real reasons far better than a hero shouldn't have to face bullets. If I shoot you, and you can't harden enough to stop the bullet, that's it. If you freeze up for a moment, or have a second of weakness when I shoot you, that's it. You're going to be injured and sitting out like Kaminari is today at best, and right before an important exam like the provisional license. Against a real argument, Kirishima didn't have a defense. Ironic again. Now though, Midoriya could turn this on its head and stop dragging Kirishima down and give him some good news. Even if I won't shoot you, not right now at least, you can still get some practice with it. Your classmate Bakugo can generate the same force as a bullet, and more. If you're looking for training, try training against him. It'd be good practice for both of you, testing how hard you can become and seeing how powerful his explosions can get. It was a win-win situation, even if it wasn't what Bakugo was looking for. He wasn't sure how well the students got along, but he figured with his good standing, he might be able to convince Bakugo to do it next time they trained together, but by Kirishima's expression, maybe he wouldn't have to. Yeah, we can do that. Thanks, teach that quote. Kirishima gave him a hearty slap on the shoulder, smiling a little wider. With this defense training, Kirishima finally had a direction to go in. Now, it was time to start making some strides. You can do that once you're done here, Kirishima. Ronin returned the smack with about the same amount of force, then drew his Ganabo from his coat to warm up. For now, I'll get you started. We'll do some basics to get you into the swing of things. On your mark. Go. Using the Ganabo, Midoriya had been able to get some training in with Kirishima. Sure, it wasn't nearly as powerful as a bullet, but practicing blocking a big heavy club was good practice in itself. The main thing was, even if Midoriya's style didn't pair well to train against Kirishima, with an item he could. This was not the case with Sato. Alright, Sato shouted with ample spirit as he and Midoriya squared up, rushing in confidently against Midoriya's sword. Since their last match, Sato had gone to the support department, getting some new gauntlets to defend against things like sword strikes so he could push through Ronin's sword swings. Midoriya still used a shinai, a wooden practice sword, to avoid cutting Sato in case one of his attacks got through, but already the gauntlets had changed the entire fight. Sato's quirk made him stronger when he took in sugar, and with just a little bit he was already a match for Midoriya in terms of sheer muscle. With a bit more, he could overpower Midoriya even with a bodysuit, allowing him to bat around Midoriya's sword with his bare hands and dive in for the attack. This part was where Midoriya hit the snag. While his sword skills could keep Sato out all day if he tried hard enough, the point of this was to train and improve, so Midoriya held back to give Sato a chance such as telegraphing his attacks, not going full speed, and keeping his movements more predictable. This way, Sato had a fair chance of actually getting past the shinai and reaching Midoriya, where the problem occurred. Izuku Midoriya was only 143 pounds on his own. With his gear, you could easily stack on over 80 pounds mostly from the bodysuit. The problem was that Sato could lift around 200 pounds with one hand, and so once he so much as touched Midoriya with just one hand. Bam! Midoriya was tossed like a ragdoll yet again by Sato, bouncing roughly down the street and rolling to his feet. Once Sato grabbed him, the vigilante had no choice but to try and use a weapon to attack Sato in close quarters or else lose immediately. The problem was he could only take so much throwing before he needed to take a second and regain his bearings, so. Ronin prepared to jump back but stumbled as his head swam. It was no surprise that Sato took advantage of this slip-up, rushing in and grabbing the shinai to toss it aside before grabbing Ronin by his coat and pinning him to the wall with a confident smile. Looks like this one's mine, sensei. Ronin glanced down at himself, wiggling a bit but clearly impressed. He nodded approvingly, then smiled at Sato. Looks about right to me, Sato. How are those gauntlets? As Sato talked about his new gauntlet, Ronin worried if this training was doing any good. He could keep slowly picking up the speed of his sword strokes, but he was a lot faster than Sato plain and simple, and had little doubt Sato wouldn't keep up with his top speed. The problem was that Ronin just wasn't heavy enough to actually give Sato a challenge at wrestling. It wasn't too big of a problem right now, there was plenty of training to do with finesse. Sato's gauntlets could only block attacks if he could react to them, after all, so as they reset and began again, they weren't wasting time. The problem was, in modern heroics, giant villains were common as hell, and they really could give Sato the pushback Ronin had no chance of doing. That was why as time ran thin, Ronin encouraged Sato to keep training against robots and perhaps large pillars of concrete, just to get used to the weight. It was a little extreme, but if Sato could toss around pillars of concrete, he'd definitely be able to handle the heavier villains he ran against. With minutes turning into seconds, Ronin and Sato bid each other farewell, earning the vigilante a full 5 minutes of respite before the next exercise began, a time he wouldn't fully get to use as Zero arrived early, excited to begin, and giving the vigilante a few ideas of what he wanted to train. While most of the students trained in martial combat, Zero had decided to push himself in a different direction, mobility. Instead of wanting to spar against Ronin, Zero asked about ways he could safely train his moves. While he sure could practice his tape swinging in the cement city, if he fucked up, he'd be really fucked up for a while and it would hurt like hell if he was lucky. There were far better places to practice swinging from great heads than over a bed of concrete. Thus, the quest began to find somewhere good to train. In all of UA's massive budget, they had to have spent some of their money making a mobility training center, but finding it on their own would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Asking the local teachers like Smintos and Ectoplasm, though, made it a whole lot easier. Once they finally discovered Basement Omega, an underground section of school that was yet another foe city, this time made out of soft materials to be sturdy yet safe to crash into, almost all of Zero's time had been spent, and Ronin had to head back just to make it to his next lesson in time. Still, it was good to know it existed, and he'd run it by a few of his more mobile students to see if they wanted to train there. For example, Mina was completely okay with going straight back to basement Omega to practice her moves. In her free time, she'd been thinking of a few ultimate moves, but she seemed confident with them and instead insisted that she get some more movement practice. And so, with Zero swinging up top as their only company, Mina chased and was chased all around the city. It was more of a workout for Ronin, the guy who was running everywhere while Mina just slid and skated around the streets, but Mina did have some movement tricks she needed to learn, namely, planning her route. Numerous times she cornered herself because of poor planning, or she'd chase Ronin somewhere she couldn't follow like up a flight of stairs. It only took a few steps to completely stop Mina in her tracks, something she'd have to get around if she wanted to be a hero with great mobility. But that was a hurdle, or in this case, staircase, she'd have to clear some other time as Ronin had one last lesson in him before he was done. The day was full of minor work here and there, and while the work was hard but usually brief, it served more as an endurance test than anything else. From switching his mindset for each student to trying to keep up with them, Midoriya was stuttered out. It was clear his injuries were having a bigger effect on him than he realized. Maybe someday he'd be able to run around in high gear all day like he had back in the summer camp, but that was something he'd do another day. Right now, Ronin had one last lesson in him before he was done, and while it was physically the easiest, it was definitely going to be his mentally hardest one. Midoriya greeted Kaminari and Eraserhead with a smile on his face and even managed to maintain that smile as he took a long list from Eraserhead of all the things Kaminari wasn't allowed to do. No quirk use, no strenuous leg motion, no weight beyond a 50 kilos at some point. They probably should have told Kaminari to keep lying down, and Midoriya thought that point was roughly 6 bullet points in. So, Kaminari, Ronin said as he read the list over one more time, one by one scratching off all the training exercises he couldn't do. No long running, no weighted squats, no quirk control practice. Almost everything Ronin had thought up for Kaminari was to increase his endurance, both to his own quirk and in general, allowing him to fight for longer at full power, but it seemed that was the one thing he wasn't allowed to do. So that left the question, what have you been practicing so far? Ronin figured smarter people than him must have come up with something for Kaminari to do if he was out here in the training hall. Unfortunately, this was self-study, meaning if Kaminari was gonna do something, he'd have to think it up himself. Kaminari himself seemed pretty aware of this problem, by the slightly nervous way he acted even before Ronin questioned him. A shifting gaze, a tapping foot, mostly the way he kept playing with his costume zipper, Kaminari was distracted significantly more than usual. So far, well, I've read over my notes, did some stretches, looked around at what the other students were doing. Kaminari trailed off, aware that while he'd been doing something, he probably hadn't been working, seeming to let down his teacher once more. Little did he know his teacher was thinking he'd done the same to his favorite student, Ronin shaking his head as he tried to cook up something they could do together. Well, how's your equipment? Ronin got an outlet when his hand brushed his new two-part helmet. Sato hadn't developed any new skills, but just by adjusting his equipment to include gauntlets, he drastically increased the situations he could deal with, and Sato said the gauntlets were still being worked on and improved right now. If you can't work on your body, you can work on your kit. I've been doing my best, but... Kaminari and Ronin moved towards the edge of the cement city, sitting on the sidewalk as Kaminari opened his hero equipment suitcase, including the maintenance kits for them, but there wasn't that much to maintain. Kaminari's hero outfit was a leather jacket, an earpiece, a vest Ronin made for him, and his sword. Of all those, only the sword needed regular maintenance to make sure it wasn't bent out of shape, but after the last fight you could bet your ass it was. Kaminari had bent it so badly it couldn't even be sheathed, and was currently in the support course getting straightened out. Still, there were a few things to touch up. Ronin picked up Kaminari's sheath and a screwdriver, checking the internals. Kaminari's sword worked with a flywheel designed to increase his draw speed, using his quirk as a power source. Opening it up, Kaminari watched with an odd bit of excitement and curiosity as Ronin inspected those internal mechanisms, humming and hawing to himself. Kaminari looked from the sheath to Ronin, his nerves palpable. Quote. So, what are we looking at? Just keeping it clean. Ronin opened the sheath fully, then turned it upside down and began to brush it, removing small bits of dust and debris. If you treat your equipment right, it will work right here, your turn. Ronin handed Kaminari the brush, letting him pick up the other half of the sheath for himself and get to work. Ronin watched as he worked, trying to speak as little as possible and give Kaminari some space to work, which is how he liked to work, but Kaminari wasn't such a loner as he immediately gravitated right back even as Ronin tried to back off. So, how often do you do this stuff for your sword? Kaminari held the sheath up, squinting at it, then holding it higher to try inspecting it, poking something inside it. Shit, that's a scratch. Write that down for a service ticket. The support course should fix that before your next practice session if you let them know early enough. Ronin leaned over, inspecting the scratch, a sign of a bad sheath. Kaminari must have shoved his sword into the sheath backwards so the blade poked the internals instead of sliding inside. But, for me, I probably don't do this enough. With all his self-maintenance, Ronin had been more focused on putting his own body back in shape instead of his gear. Sure, he fixed the tears in his jackets and replaced his bulletproof armor regularly, but there was more he could do, cleaning his guns, checking the electronics, and inspecting the normal parts to see if there were any parts that needed to be replaced. Kindness was hit so hard a week ago that the barrel of the pistol now had a scratch near the slide. He should definitely hit up now the next chance he got to see if he could get a replacement part. But, this type of kid did give Ronin a direction to move in, and a little lesson in it he could never forget the equipment that he broke. Was it his poor maintenance? Had it been Muscular's attacks? Did he push it too hard? Who could truly say? The lessons that stick with us the best are the ones that come from our mistakes, so learn from mine. Keep checking up on your weapons. You wouldn't want a failure in the field, like your sword snapping in two. Kaminari laughed at the thought, not realizing how literal the lesson was as he nodded. Yeah, you see that headpiece, sensei? I can use that to tune into radio frequencies in my phone, but sometimes when I try to go all out, I fry the thing. I'm pretty sure some of the wires get crossed, or maybe it just can't handle too much juice. Hey. Ronin nodded along. Kaminari probably fried it by just putting too much power in, which might have made some of the protective material on the wires melt, making them cross and turning it from a piece of equipment to a piece of fashion. As long as you stay on it and keep bringing it up with whoever designs your equipment, they should keep working on it. Make the most of it. You'll have to pay for that kind of help once you leave UA. Ronin couldn't think of much other equipment Kaminari could need. He had all the basics. Most of Ronin's usual upgrades, like body armor, would slow down Kaminari. Ronin could wear so much equipment because the muscle suit enhanced his strength, and because his uniform was designed to distribute the weight across his body evenly. Despite being taller, Kaminari weighed less than Midoriya, probably less than Midoriya even without their equipment, from all the dense muscle Midoriya had been packing on since he started. But if there wasn't new equipment to make, there was one to improve. Get better with one's equipment. So, yesterday was a shit show. With your laundry list of things you can't do, it's clear we can't work out your body, but your technique. Ronin trailed off as he put his hands on his knees and stood, working his left arm a bit before moving to his duffel bag and drawing two new shiname just for today. Grab a sword, Kaminari, and clear your head. Yesterday you showed off your passion, now we're gonna see your skill. Finish your Gatorade, then grab a sword, we've got some work to do. Kaminari looked up, nodding with eyes widening and a smile growing as he moved to chug his drink and stand. After you put your sheath back together. And start screwing the sheath back together, setting it aside, and then standing with a bounce in his step as he moved towards his teacher, excited and eager to redeem himself. Sir, yes sir, chapter and notes. Yo, keeping that quote this brief, but I can definitely feel like this training is going a bit slow. I just have so much I want to do. I want to show how Bakugo, without Midoriya, is pretty much uncontested in class as I've already said, but I want to show some of those positives about him being unrivaled, like his incredible combat prowess and analytical mind doing something. But I also want to explore Kurashima. He's one of my faves. I love his quirk, his personality, and his fighting style plus all the ways he could get better. And to top all that off, they're not the main show, Kaminari is. But I've already done a lot with Kaminari, how can I keep doing things without repeating? The answer is probably to check what I've done so I know what I'm building off of and to throw a few seeds of future ideas to explore right now. Once again, this is the setup showcase, where I do a lot of setups and not a lot of stuff at the moment. The next chapter will still be slow. This is a training arc after all, but it should be a little faster than this one, with some of that sweet payoff coming in. I hope you enjoyed it, as I tried to think of some training that each student would probably do, and some things UA would probably have, like a mobility course, or in their case an entire city dedicated to training and practicing mobility. If they can have, 8 cities just for fighting and an entire amusement park for rescuing, they better have at least a few streets set up for mobility practice. As usual, big thanks to my editor Ebony Bird of Doom for all the work they put in, and to you for reading it. Hope you have a good time, amigo, but for now, adios. Chapter 227, Back to Basics. Chapter Summary. After a long absence, Midoriya gets more practice building up someone's basics as he tries to bring Kaminari back up to his former skill level and higher. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Kaminari fiddled with his practice sword, poking his finger between bamboo strips while Midoriya finished his own setup, just moving his bag to the side. It wasn't that complicated, just picking a random street to square up on. A slightly familiar street. Smintas had done such a good job cleaning up the city, you couldn't even see the bloodstains and scratches in the faux city from the last fight that scarred this area. Midoriya stopped inspecting the street, rising from a crouch with his shinai resting against his shoulder. Still no guard, still relaxed as he looked over his student. Whenever you're ready, Kaminari. Kaminari glanced at him, then back to the shinai in his own hands, slowly taking a stance with his feet apart and his sword pointing at Midoriya. The tip wobbled and drooped slightly between the reed that was Kaminari and the rock that was Ronin. Hiya. Kaminari made a weak battle cry as he lunged forward, going in for an overhead attack with one big step and a bigger swing, his sword swinging wildly, biting nothing but air as Ronin stepped to the side. Ronin's face seemed to follow the sword as it cleanly missed, his own sword gently rising off his shoulder and twirling around to tap Kaminari on the shoulder. The blow was so soft that Kaminari didn't react, just stepping back and preparing for another attack when hit. Ronin reset himself after landing the first blow, but Kaminari took a second to realize what just happened, his guard fully dropping and then grabbing his arm that had just been struck well, gently tapped. Wait, what? Kaminari slowly wrapped his head around what happened, the little details coming back to him. This wasn't about beating the crap out of his opponent, this was just about touching them with a stick sword thing. And that meant, oh, he lost. He lost in, like, 3 seconds. Oh, shit. Calm down, Kaminari. Ronin's shinai returned to his shoulder, held in one hand by a loose grip as the teacher oversaw his student with a relaxed smile. Don't let your emotions overtake you, this is just a warm-up, alright? Whenever you're ready. The double meaning was a little lost on Kaminari, but the reassuring words weren't as Kaminari returned to guard, breathing deeply and holding his sword tight. Then, looking over his own grip compared to Ronin's, gradually loosened his grip. As his grip became more relaxed, so too did his sword, no longer was it wobbling and waving with every strain of his muscles but staying in a much tighter area. Ronin nodded immediately, a wordless approval of Kaminari's actions. They shared a small smile, Kaminari going from so serious to quietly chuckling with his teacher as he replayed the training in his head, and then, they began to train. It was immediately clear that Kaminari was out of practice in what must have been a million ways, and his slow remembrance of how to spar was just another drop in the bucket as the young hero relearned what he'd forgotten bit by bit. Soon, the massive swing shrunk into quick strikes, little movements with much less power but more precision. Maintain control over yourself, Ronin reminded as Kaminari pressed in eagerly, deflecting the hero's attack to one side to leave him stumbling for a moment before the vigilante shinai struck Kaminari lightly on the leg, then snaked out to hover against the boys just to stop him from falling. Hit, called out Kaminari, planting both his feet after a moment and noticing the practice sword that not only caught him but could have delivered a far more serious injury than just a cut leg. Ronin said nothing about it though, merely pushing Kaminari a step back while moving away himself, disengaging after the spar to reset. Put less weight behind your attacks, Ronin repeated. How many times had he given that advice? How many times had he failed to listen to that advice? Ronin worked his arm, chastising himself for being too quick to rush, then returned to his guard. Whenever you're ready. Again Kaminari moved in, still putting too much force into his attacks too early, but it was less. As Ronin stepped past the first swing, Kaminari wasn't pulled forward by his own attack, instead turning to keep his opponent in front of him and attacking again. Ronin turned sideways, putting his shinai and his shoulder to Kaminari, then dropping his sword against Kaminari's. Ronin's sword was braced against his body, easily deflecting a sword held in an outstretched limb, and pushing Kaminari off balance again. If Kaminari had been attacking more lightly, it would have just pushed away his arm instead of his whole body. Hit by hit, blow by blow, a rhythm was formed that they both gradually fell into. Kaminari stepped in, striking to Ronin's left, striking the sword, then immediately bouncing off and going for his right. It was still blocked, Ronin pivoting his body and keeping his arms mostly in place to block the next strike, but it wasn't immediately countered. Ronin had to actually dodge as Kaminari's shinai bounced off of his defense to build distance, then lunged forward with a thrust. Ronin backed off, using his own shinai to swat away at Kaminari's shinai as he parted, but as Kaminari lunged behind his blade he was able to control it more easily by keeping it close, realigning his strike and thrusting again, then turning it into a small swing at the last minute. That last minute adjustment caused Ronin's usual parry to miss by a few inches, taking Kaminari's first hit to the forearm. Hit. Good adjustments, Kaminari. The blonde bolt smiled wide as he looked at his handiwork, dampened as he reflected on how long it took, then hardened into a determined smirk as he vowed to make his next hit faster. I'm just getting warmed up, sir. And after all that slowing down, Kaminari and Ronin began to slowly pick up the pace. Multiple attacks became more common, attacking was done while blocking or dodging, and everything slowly became more and more fluid, never reaching the breakneck pace Kaminari started with, but seemingly just as fast somehow. Kaminari couldn't put a finger on why as he blocked Ronin's swift pokes, shifting his position around Ronin and then suddenly switching direction to try and find a gap. He struck once, hitting nothing but air, then pushed forward for a moment to chase down a hit before jumping away, almost taking a hit himself for his troubles. Nice and fluid, Kaminari. Keep it all connected. Ronin's voice had a tinge of pride as he pursued Kaminari, his steps sure and steady as he came forward like a glacier, seemingly slow but damn near unstoppable. Eyes on my sword tip, Kaminari. Try dodging and attacking. Yes sir, hit. Keep going. Yes sir. Kaminari began to try just dodging attacks, Ronin switching to more simple strikes to help his student. Somehow, this all felt faster than Kaminari's breakneck attack of yesterday. He couldn't put his finger on why. They were both going so much slower, it was like, objectively slower. He was literally flying around the road yesterday, so why did trying to land a hit against Ronin without getting smacked himself feel so much faster? Unfortunately, Kaminari wasn't good enough at combat to think up the answer himself, and Ronin still hadn't manifested an actual mind-reading quirk, leaving Kaminari to just feel out the vibes as he shifted his focus from attacking and dodging to attacking while dodging, getting some better results as he got hit less even if he landed hits less. Beep tilde. And how time flies, Midoriya mused as he broke off from the fight, turning off the timer on his waistband and dropping his sword point to the ground, bringing his last training to an end. He looked over his final student of the day with pride, proud to see what Kaminari could still do. It seemed like yesterday's disaster was an outlier, not the norm, but that was just his perspective. How do you feel, Kaminari? Tired. With the final 30 minutes up, Kaminari dropped his sword and his butt to the ground, sitting down as he caught his breath. Most training exercises would go 10, maybe 20 minutes, but Midoriya was used to the larger sprawling fights of the streets usually involving chases in the middle of them as your opponent tried to book it when they realized they weren't going to win. Nothing like a little endurance training to prep for those moments. You did great, Kaminari. Here. Kaminari automatically raised his hands even before Midoriya pulled out the Gatorade, tossing it to his sitting companion and collecting Kaminari's shinai, then beginning to pack his things. How do you think it went? It took Kaminari a second to answer as he drank deeply. This warehouse was actually kind of hot, with no AC. What had started as a dim dark room quickly heated up as the day went on, and only got worse as the students moved around. Midoriya hardly noticed. He had the muscle suit and its energy-absorbing coolness to cheat the heat, but maybe turning on a little AC tomorrow would be a good idea to stop Kaminari from drinking half his Gatorade in one sitting. It was fast. Even when he finished, Kaminari had to take a few seconds to breathe between his words. Like, that felt fast to you, right? Midoriya nodded. Honestly, the thing they'd just done was about on pace with the Kendo Club, probably slower. The Kendo Club also had tons of difficult terrain, people and things you could accidentally back yourself into, trash you could step on, and extremely battle-hungry opponents who were far more comfortable using sword-like weapons than Kaminari was. But just because it was slower didn't mean the sparring training didn't have some fundamentals hidden in. That speed you're feeling was probably flow, Midoriya explained, putting both shinais into the duffel bag and then focusing his attention on Kaminari. As you get into a state of flow, your actions lead into one another, creating that sense of speed as you lose less downtime. It's like when you play a video game for a bit, and after what might seem a normal start, you slowly get faster as you get used to it and better weave everything together. By better using your dodges and attacks, you don't need to do one or the other, you can weave them together, doing two actions at once. That's a simple enough example of flow. Midoriya personally understood it better from a studying sense of getting into a rhythm with reading, writing, and responding to questions. Personally, math was his forte for this sort of thing, but he understood Kaminari enough to know Kaminari wouldn't understand that and probably couldn't relate. As you practice, you'll get better at weaving it all together, dodging and positioning, attacking and positioning, dodging and attacking. Maybe even all three at once. It was a little more complicated than just that, but Midoriya figured that was a good note to end on. Just something to think on between our sessions. Here. Midoriya helped the sweaty student off the floor, nodding appreciatively as he looked up at Kaminari. You did very well, even not counting your injuries. Now go get your rest, you'll need it. Kaminari smiled with a shade more genuine as he looked over his master, nodding in turn even if he didn't understand what they were nodding about. Yeah, I will. And I'll see you tomorrow, so you better be ready. Kaminari turned to lightly jog away, ignoring Recovery Girl's words about no big movement until something caught his attention as he made his way to the exit. Midoriya didn't see the exact moment Kaminari slowed to a pause by the door, turning back to shout. Hey, sir. Midoriya shouldered the bag, stopping his quick check of his things as he glanced up at Kaminari a little confused. What did Kaminari want? The aspiring hero was in no position to keep training. In fact, Midoriya had only intended to train 20 minutes with him before he got lost in the rhythm of fighting. What did he want to say? Thanks. Kaminari started strong, stumbling a bit as he tried to figure out what he wanted to say, then just went with his instinct as his voice raised to a shout, glowing with joy as he spoke. Thanks for coming back. Midoriya didn't get to respond as Kaminari laughed, feeling another weight off his shoulders as he ran out of the gym, leaving Midoriya alone. Ashamed he couldn't see his own soft smile as he adjusted his bag, shaking his head before heading out himself. Chapter end notes. Yo, good to finally post. Just a quick chapter to pick up where we left off with Kaminari. If we could, but believe it or not, Midoriya's not the only one whose skills need sharpening. I mean, you know that, you just read the chapter, but hypothetically you get what I'm rambling about. So I did a little reflecting to see where Kaminari was in his training, and unsurprisingly like Midoriya he's generally thought to be better than he is. Let me lay it clear, Kaminari is not a good swordsman. He does not practice enough to be a swordsman, he doesn't understand how to use a sword well enough, and he's just outright not good enough yet. But that was where he left off, not where he is right now, and after missing practice for a month, he's even worse than before. But, he already did this stuff, and it's never as hard the second time. It's hard to describe in interesting and understandable ways how someone's improving but still not good. For example, I made specific note of this, but almost everyone in the Kendo Club is better at fighting with a sword than Kaminari, mostly just because of practice time. Even if the Kendo Club doesn't use correct forms, they practice their fighting every day for years because that's how long they've been fighting like that. Midoriya can beat them because he has better form and has been practicing harder in less time, and is trying to be better, but Kaminari is not Midoriya. They're different people. Side note, editor still hasn't touched this chapter. This time I'm finger waggling them because they said they would last week, and how dare they be late one chapter out of the over 40, bare minimum. I've had them edit for free because they're a homie. Truly an outrage. Side note, how dare you read this stuff? You feel special for reading this extra rambling. You better. I curse upon you a great day, so adios amigos. Side note, editor did it. Thanks homie, and I curse a great day upon you too. Chapter 228, Building Off Basics. Chapter summary. With some groundwork to build off, Ronin finally can start building up exam math in the little time he has left with just 3 days left to train them before his term is up. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. With some grounds finally set up in the seed zone, Midoriya was happy to stop working on the basics once again and get to more advanced techniques. He hoped. Sato, Kirishima, and Kaminari had just established their solid grounds, things that they could work to develop further from in their respective new fields even if new wasn't exactly the correct term. Shiro, Mina, and Bakugo were already at the next step though, exploring their field and developing in ways according to their taste. For one side, it'd be best to let them explore around to pick something they like, and for the other Midoriya would try to match his training to their chosen paths. It didn't take much to rework Midoriya's original training plans, so he was almost finished before he even left UA, leaving him with plenty of time to himself for his training. Running in circles, doing push-ups, pull-ups, and a whole bunch of workouts until Midoriya got to feel exactly what his students had felt hours ago. Yeah, sure, like getting backquote yourself into backquote some weird-ass sheet, Sendifighter, Mao said from above Midoriya as he practiced his man-ups, something very important for trying to scale a building. It was like a pull-up, but instead of just trying to reach his chin to the bar, he was trying to get over it with both chin, shoulders, and even hips. Very useful at the end of climbing a wall and making your arms feel like they were about to fall off. Train in backquote kids, train in backquote yourself, beat in backquote dashi out of backquote punks, you got time for a hobby and all that. Beating punks. HRNG. Is my hobby. GRNH. Midoriya made some interesting faces as he tried to do his fifth man up. He was generally pretty good at them with his small stature and lightweight, but being good at it and being able to do a bunch of them were separate things. The fact that he could do even one put him well above most, and his ability to do almost 5 wasn't one to be looked down upon even if his form deteriorated to garbage and his body swung in every direction but up. Are ya sure self-torture ain't nothing backquote? Mao watched Midoriya's wiggling effort with a raised eyebrow, swinging around like a fish on a hook as the young vigilante tried to get his elbows above the bar so he could push down and finish the workout. The main man himself was just sitting nearby, happy to watch until the floppy fish finally fell to the ground creating a small cloud of dust that stuck to the boy's wet skin like paint. He chuckled as he rose, walking over to drop Midoriya's plastic bottle near his head. I think ya backquote got a knack for it. Fuck off. Having the breath knocked out of him was pretty normal for Midoriya at this point. It barely bothered him as he took a few seconds to rise off the ground. He only sipped the water, mostly using it like an ice pack to cool off despite the already cool training room. My main hobby's taking enough time already. Besides, all our work is about to pay off. I think I've got the drug lab on lock, so tomorrow night, you and me, some guards, and a whole lab of drugs direct. Well, maybe ya backquote hobby ain't all sheet. Ya backquote sure know how to backquote plan a party. Mao nodded appreciatively, smirking, then helped Midoriya to his feet. Well, I've got all the time in the world, nothing to do tomorrow all day. Wanna give me that address? My backquote check it out early tilde. And blow the surprise. No way. The pair walked out of the firing range they used for training, Midoriya dusting off his legs and arms as they went. I kind of want this attack to work, Mao. Hey, you backquote don backquote one backquote me get in backquote all dog glory. With a cheeky shrug, Mao led the way through the abandoned military base back above ground and Midoriya followed the giant gangster as if it were completely natural. It was funny how the weirdest situation could become normal, finding criminals, fighting them, finding Mao, training with him. It had morphed from a strange experience into Midoriya's routine. Sure, it was better on some days and worse on others, but that was just how it went. On the other hand, how the fuck are there so many criminals? Constantly. It felt like Midoriya had beat the shit out of half a city, and just focusing on the Yakuza, surely he was nearing 1,000 takedowns by now. Where the hell were criminal organizations getting all these people? Great questions Midoriya hoped to answer someday, but first, finishing training. The Vigilante's final training was the same as always, combat training. Trying to teach Kaminari and the rest of Exam F helped Midoriya sharpen his basics. Sparring against the Kendo Club developed his sword skills, especially with a handicap, and the streets were great practice just through sheer repetition. But none were as useful as facing Mao. The two fought for just 30 minutes, with Ronin cycling through most of his weapons as the two fought in the courtyard of the abandoned base. Hiding around buildings, using his guns to harass from a range, changing from guns to fire axe, launching blasts of fire while advancing into melee, then changing again from axe to electric spear to try and maintain distance. It wasn't just the best training because he could use all these options in one long, continuous fight. It was the best because Mao was a genuine threat who could actually beat Ronin, and even with all his options, it was Mao who tended to win these engagements. Being stuck against such overwhelming defense forced Ronin to cycle through more of his options to try and get solid hits, while still being threatened by heavy counter hits. He couldn't get comfortable, like when he tried just using the spear for a minute, banking on its long reach to keep him safe right until Mao tanked a spear hit, grabbed the spear, and pulled Ronin in for a nice big haymaker.